Cyberpunk, shiny and chrome. 51, Chapter 51, Setting the Record Straight. Michael Mago Sobranov. Regina really outdid herself, huh? Despite myself, I flicked the replay on for the third time in a row. The trafficker. Saigo Sujiro groaned loudly as he finally returned to his lightless apartment, his body perfectly upright despite the alcohol currently sloshing through his veins. He hated the feeling, but he had to hold a celebration for his contacts to display his recent successes. Setting up a business in H11 had been slow at first, but he had expected that much. The Tiger Claw boss was a reasonable one and didn't ask too much in tribute for working on his territory, even if he was incredibly dismissive of Saigo's contributions. Sure, his business wasn't glorious, but it brought in more eddies than their fucking pachinko parlors at least. Didn't matter, he didn't need the goon's respect, just his protection. He spat on the synth wool carpet in irritation as he switched the lights on, and immediately swore to beat his assistant black and blue as he saw the battered body still splayed out on his bed, breathing shallowly and completely unmoved even 12 hours later. A proper businessman sampled his merchandise thoroughly. He near growled in annoyance as he saw a message flick itself into his cornea all of a sudden and stopped unbelting his pants. And then blinked. His assistant flatlined himself. What a fucking waste of eddies. He spat again and decided he might as well make use of the stupid tiger goons the Okada had tossed his way and have the waste on his bed dragged out. If she couldn't get up after half a day, she was a bad investment anyways. Also, he was craving something fresher today. So decided, he rung up one of his other assistants, Oi Kanto. Right, good. He nodded as he set up the cleanup, and send. The power cut out. Number 15, up. He finished as he felt a shiver of instinctive fear pass down his spine, each word dragging out for longer than the previous one. Fear that was quickly replaced with anger. What the fuck? He growled, which gonk thinks he is being funny? He nearly stumbled over a side closet, grunting in pain as he hit the edge and barely stopped himself from falling over. Do you know who the fuck you are dealing with, huh? The fear was back now as his shitty optics frantically searched the completely dark space. I'll have you and your entire family. His rant was cut off halfway as he stumbled again, seemingly against nothing. The lights flickered back on and he went to scramble back up. A curse about Night Corp's shitty maintenance already halfway through his throat. Only what he found as he sat up shut him up completely and utterly. He did not stumble over. He had lost half of his leverage. Saigo Sujiro stared at the detached leg sprawled a few feet away from him, and then at the stump just below his right knee that was practically pissing blood, and screamed, the assassin. She did her best to keep her scowl down as her monowire retracted back into her hand, finally silencing the fat fuck whose death she had been paid to drag out for as long as possible. Honestly, she thought with disgust, after listening to him speak for less than a minute, I might have done it for free. Still, the bonus was very specifically outlined in making the target regret ever being alive, and so she did, even if she had to activate her hormone blockers to stop from vomiting halfway through. The fat fuck was resilient. The paycheck was just too good for a few hours' work to refuse, and the target definitely deserved it besides. More out of habit than any real purpose, she ended up searching through the target's systems and quickly found a slew of messages discussing another delivery of merchandise agreed upon a week in advance. She tilted her head at the laptop, and it didn't take her all that much thought before decided to download the data in case the employer was feeling even more generous today. Freaks that ordered hits like these usually like that kind of proactive thinking, and as much as she disliked doing them, she still needed to earn a living. Satisfied with the target's mangled and thoroughly dead state, she went to exit only to pause as her gaze passed the tortured joy toy sprawled on the bed. She sighed and quickly scooped the poor woman up, placing her in a fireman's carry before slinking out of the apartment without making a single sound. She left the joy toy in what she hoped was a safe spot and called up her fixer. Target eliminated. The expectant look of Regina Jones did not ease, and the other request. She pressed. The client should be satisfied with what I managed. She answered after a brief pause. I also got some data they might be interested in. I'll be the judge of that. The fixer's response was immediate and stern, but I suspect they just might. The recording. She didn't bother answering and instead uploaded the whole thing through her external cyberdeck/laptop. Excellent. The fixer nodded. Gigs closed. Have a good day, Kimigawa. You too, Reggie. Yumiko nodded back and ended the call. She failed to contain the thrill of satisfaction as she saw a fat 80,000 drop into account. Say what you will about the freak who ordered the hit, but they definitely knew how to motivate her. Michael Magos Sobronov. Thanks, I said as I closed the replay and my artifacts ripped the flying bottle of beer from the air, safely plopping it into my expectant hand a second later. Hopefully that will be that. I decided to simply bury the situation from this point on. The Joy Toys should be taken care of by Regina's people, and Jugo should have gotten the message loud and clear. And the shipment will have been dealt with in good order as well. I could finally stop twisting my reactor about this. My mechadendrite drew me back to reality as it whirred behind me, flicking off the bottle cap with a slight twist, and I wisely accepted that as that, and enjoyed the delightful bitterness of the drink as I stared off into the scattering mega-building crowd. Those things always look so damn useful. Rebecca shook her head as she joined me on the balcony. They are incredibly useful, I smirked, and would probably burn the brain of anyone who isn't a specialized Fullborg to a crisp in seconds. She grinned up at me teasingly. But not you? Knowing a trap when I heard one, I just grumbled into my bottle and took a long sip. Hey, she said after a short bit, looking herself over, do you think I got taller recently? It's really been fucking with me. You did, I confirmed easily. Huh, is all she said, eyebrows rising, and then her eyes snapped back up to me, not immediately accusatory, but there was a flash of realization there. Looking away briefly, I worked my jaw before saying, yes, I had something to do with it. She tensed. What? Just went ahead and dealt with some malnourishment issues you built up when I fixed you. I turned to her with slightly raised arms, and seeing her intense stare, I looked away again and muttered, and I got rid of the skin cancer you got from the chemical treatment. Whatever she was about to say died in her throat as she suddenly choked, making me turn back to her with a look of concern, only to see her waving me down. I'm fine, she said, clearing her throat before she gave me a bemused look, but seriously, don't just go out and say something ridiculous like that. I almost died there. Sorry, I chuckled, feeling a brief flood of relief. I'll try to keep sudden medical condition jump scares to a minimum. You better, mister. She grinned briefly as her expression turned curious. How did you do it anyway? Nanomachines, I said, seriously at first, but something about the answer still tickled my hindbrain. Really? She asked, baffled. How did you get your hands on those? Also, you sure you should be using something like that? I made them. I interrupted her with a shit-eating smirk. She just stared up at me for a bit at that, before rubbing her chin in thought. I went to speak, but her muttering interrupted me. So that's why I can walk. Really? I deadpanned, a massive chunk of my stress dying a silent death as it was replaced by exasperation. It was now her turn to give me a shit-eating smirk. I paused, suddenly feeling a bit awkward. Aren't weirded out or anything? Weirded out? Her questioning look turned teasing. Why would I be weirded out by my scary inputs preem aftercare? Gah! I looked away and muttered. I was stressing my chrome off, expecting... What was I even expecting? A reaction? I asked, more than said, you are just taking this in stride. This naturally only made the teasing gremlin cackle as she scooted over closer to me and patted my arm. You're cute. My only recourse to preserve my dignity was to look away and grumble away. It didn't work. Half an hour later, as we were chatting away about random things, the topic inevitably shifted back to my day at work, and the fact I returned almost completely untouched. The rate at which I went through coats, and to a lesser extent my clothing, had by now become something of an inside joke between us. And to have the current one not need immediate recycling after the shitstorm that was Jugo's meeting was quite frankly ridiculous. Can't you just... She waved her hands dramatically. Toss me the recording of the whole thing. I am pretty sure you have. Becca, I deadpanned, Recording a gig like that would be incredibly unprofessional. She just stared, her look saying, "I know you are shitting me, and you know I know you are shitting me." And of course, I folded immediately. "All right, fine, I do have BD recordings, but they are made with my hardware in mind." It didn't take her long to understand the issue. That would be some fucky overstimulation, huh? Yup, I nodded. "I'm not burning your brain with what is effectively an XBD for kicks." See? Instead of being annoyed, she cheered. "Told you you were cute." Wisely grumbling my complaints away again, I soldiered on and told her about what happened in broad strokes, pointedly not telling her about the traitor's family, because that would have just been depressing. "Hold on a moment." Rebecca crossed her arms, eyes narrow in dramatic fury. "You let her use your what now?" "My autocannon." I repeated. "Do keep up." A silent moment passed. "You have a fucking autocannon," she practically screeched, clutching at my hoodie as she tried and failed to toss me about. "Yup." I smacked my lips. "And you let that tiger bitch use it first." She deflated. "Should have come out when I invited you 3 days back." I shrugged, "But you were too busy being a couch potato." "No!" she cried out dramatically. She got really freaky about it too. I shook my head with a pretend shudder, started breathing heavily and everything. You'd almost think she didn't just see two of her friends die in front of her. Rebecca held back a snort. "Ah, but Mike." She tried sounding patronizing and failed because she was still half chuckling. "Didn't you know?" "Know what?" I looked down curiously. "Bitches love cannons." She snapped her fingers with a grin. "Which means you are letting me try that bad boy out." "Sure thing, Rebecca." I rolled my eyes good-naturedly as I ruffled her hair. Unusually, that failed to annoy her, and I have the perfect place to do it. She preempted any further response. "Got a gig you want me to tag along on?" I asked, not particularly minding the idea. "Nah." She waved it off. "Falco is coming back soon, and Biotechnica should have stopped looking for us by now, so Maine and the rest are coming back to NC too." "And you want us to what?" I crossed my arms. "Play escort for them or something?" "Yup." She nodded cheerily. "Badlands are usually a shit heap of danger, and I don't want my tunes to get ganked by a wraith raiding spree." "Aren't wraith attacks already a given, though? Your tunes should know to avoid them if they are hiding out with the nomads." I asked, tapping my finger on the balcony ledge expectantly. "They probably do, but I want to be sure." She confirmed, her look knowing. "Also, you can just say you don't want to go and get Maine. I'd get it." "Tsick." I clicked my tongue. "I don't actually hate him enough to tell you no. I just don't like interacting with him." "Man, you two are such babies about everything," she teased before slowly yawning. "How am I the baby here?" I asked, throwing my hands up. I was being polite and shit, and the man just turned hostile on me for no reason. Rebecca nodded, smirking. My eyes narrowed in warning, to which her teasing expression only grew. My mechadendrite whipped out, grabbing her by the scruff of her jacket. "Oh no," she sing-songed before she was yanked off the ground, and naturally all she did as she was carried inside was let out a cheery "wee." Damn, I think I am in love. "So what do you think?" Jackie asked me over the call. I stopped my tinkering briefly to consider the question. Objectively, I would recommend against it. Your chrome is good, but all it takes is one fuck-up, and all of a sudden, you are fist-fighting a half-borg. I immediately shot him a pointed look across the call. "But since I know I can't convince you otherwise, I'll say make sure to conduct your biz on their periphery, preferably the coast. Under no circumstances are you to accept gigs that go on near these places." I sent him a full list of the biggest maelstrom hotspots. "Thanks, Mike." Jackie grinned. "You are a lifesaver. Just make sure you keep your head on a swivel with your new runner." I said with utmost gravitas. I have heard of this T-bug before, and while her rep in the cafe is solid, I only really know her by name. "Didn't I already tell you Yoko vouched for her?" Jackie asked, frowning. "That is the bare minimum when dealing with unknowns, Jack." I retorted. "Never hurts to watch your back." Yeah, Holmes, I get ya." He waved it off. "I'll make sure not to rely on her too much until she proves herself." "Just be careful." I pressed, annoyed by his flippancy. "Watson is pretty much on fire now, and I wouldn't want to see you burned." "Ah, don't you start with the metaphors now, too," Jackie exclaimed dramatically. Bug is already killing me with her weird philosopher quotes. I don't need you joining her. Truly, what a plebeian response, I said with fake pomp before chuckling and giving him a wave. Have fun, Jack. Hasta luego, Mike. He waved a salute back and ended the call. Shaking my head at the bull-headed gonk, I updated my monitoring software just in case he decided to ignore my warnings and sink himself directly into the heart of Maelstrom to spite me or something equally stupid. A Maelstrom that instead of being cowed by the loss of their leader and a bunch of their fellow retards was now fucking excited to keep the slaughter going. And Brick, the poor fucker who somehow survived the shit show at Totentanz, simply did not have the influence to calm them down, despite inheriting the position. Supposedly, he was one of the more reasonable members of their death cult, but it would be a miracle if he survived long enough to actually start mattering enough to take control anyway. I shook my head and decided I simply did not want to deal with that clusterfuck so early in the morning and returned to my tinkering, which is when my monitoring systems warned me of an irregularity, and despite being tempted to ignore it for my work, I still scanned the whole of my territory just in case, only to pause as I noticed a rather unexpected figure. She was currently shuffling nervously in one of the more secluded corners of the floor while repeatedly staring directly into the camera currently observing her, as if she was expecting someone to notice her. "Hello there, Ms. V," I muttered, picked up my guns and rushed out of my workshop. 52. Chapter 52. Corporate Deals. Michael Margos Sobranov. Despite my initial rush to get ready, I did not immediately march up to my surprise visitor, and instead primed all the hidden turrets I had under my command, before making sure she wasn't just playing bait for her fellow Arasaka rats while they tried doing something I would find highly objectionable. She had proven herself trustworthy once, but I was taking no chances. Thankfully, she didn't appear to be seeking the Darwin Award today, so my plan of action de-escalated from complete annihilation to aggressive negotiation. As to why I was so suspicious of her, despite knowing she had a good head on her shoulders, well, besides her still being Arasaka, the answer was quite plain. Shobo could have never succeeded in negotiating with Maelstrom solely on his own authority. It didn't matter how influential he was, or even if he somehow managed to prove to the Tiger Claw leadership that Jugo was planning on backstabbing him first, the latter was still an Okada, and turning the gang against one of those was practically an impossibility. And that is without mentioning the out-for-blood fixer that would be aiming for his throat if he ever managed it. No, to survive something as utterly suicidal as what he tried, he needed an even higher level of support, like say the mega corporation that held the Tiger Claw's leash. And even then, he would have died the moment he stopped being favored by the Corp. The more I thought about it, the more I realized just how utterly fucked the man had been from day one, and it couldn't have happened to a better person. Add to that the fact he came to the meeting equipped with high-grade Arasaka ICE implanted into his cranium, and it really wasn't too hard to put two and two together. The Corp had wanted him to come out on top. Why that could be? I could spend hours coming up with reasons and likely reach some kind of approximate guess, but that sounded like a massive waste of processing power I could direct literally anywhere else. What concerned me was that I was there, and their interference threatened the stability of my home. And now, not even a full day later, I find a counter-intel agent pacing in my territory. What was that term old Chu used like a curse again? I thought as I palmed my shotgun. Ah, yes, I chuckled. Interesting times indeed. The Corpo. Her vision briefly swam for the nth time this morning before her new bioregulator implant kicked in and forced her fatigue back with all the grace of a hammer to the skull. She clutched both her hands as she forced down the exhausted grunt threatening to leave her throat and glared back into the camera. Did I overestimate him? She frowned briefly. All her research told her she should have been spotted the moment she walked onto floor 16, but so far aside from a few curious looks she got from the passers-by, there had been zero indication of the cyborg noticing her. Or was he ignoring her on purpose? She sincerely doubted he was so close to Isamu Okada as to ignore her just because of Jenkins' massive fuck-up yesterday. He was just the man's golden goose ripper dog, and sometimes netrunner, right? Mercs and gangers tended not to mesh all that well in NC. Well, too bad even if he was. Because she needed to set up that meeting yesterday. She wasn't becoming Jenkins' fool woman, even if she had to blackmail the cyborg into setting it up. Just the fact she was the one tasked with gathering information on Tiger Claw assets in the area meant all the blame could quite be tossed at her feet, and Arasaka wouldn't care so long as someone was promptly punished for the failure. Her right foot began tapping the floor as she glared at the camera, a bead of sweat falling down the side of her face. Well, I tried being patient. "Good morning," said a familiar synthetic voice as the barrel of a gun pressed against the back of her head. "Valerie Price. How do you—" She immediately bit down on her stupid question. Of course he knew her fucking name. And then stilled as she realized the looming tower of chrome had approached her without making a single sound. Fuck. It seems there is some intelligent thought happening up there after all, the Borg drawled, despite the suicidal stimulant abuse. Her face twitched into a brief scowl as she forcefully calmed herself down, taking in slow breaths as she raised her hands to her sides, slowly bringing them up as she spoke. "I'm not here for trouble, I just want to talk." Talk? The cyborg sounded amused now. After that shit show yesterday, awfully convenient. So he's already guessed that much, her mind raced, especially after the shit show yesterday. She settled on saying, Magos hummed briefly before she felt the gun retract from her head. "Fine." She exhaled in relief and slowly turned to face him, finding him looking pretty much the same as the last time she saw him, except for the rather notable change to one of his eyes. "Thanks." She wisely ignored how unnerving the stare felt. "You haven't proven to be completely rotten." He shrugged and hung the crusher on his shoulder. "Yet." "Keep talking like that and I won't have to," she thought, knowing she still held all the cards. Not waiting for her answer, he started walking away while waving for her to follow him. "Come on, might as well sit and talk like civilized people." She felt a spike of impatience, but she had her foot through the door now, and rushing things would be counterproductive. She had limited time, but not to the point she had to bulldoze through everything. Unsurprisingly, he did not immediately lead her to his workshop, despite its location being publicly known, but towards the more active parts of the floor. Already dreading the crowd they would have to push through, she was greeted by the utterly alien sight of the civilians consciously moving out of their way, some of them even offering brief, respectful nods to the cyborg. The whole thing was so utterly surreal, she didn't even notice him leading her to a busy noddle shop and into a quiet corner that seemed to be equipped with reinforced seating. Just how much influence did he have? "Old Chu renovated recently," Magos said unprompted as he leaned back into his chair. "His business has been doing pretty damn well." "Good for him." Valerie didn't quite drawl, but it was a close thing. "You sure this place is secure?" "Just let me worry about security." The cyborg gave her a pointed look and waved to someone behind her. "Chu, get me 4 deluxe sets, one for the lady too." "Coming right up," an old Chinese man called back. "I'm not hungry," Valerie said, hoping to speed things up. "Yes, you are," Magos responded with a lazy wave of his hand. "And you should take the opportunity to take a breather. Who knows, it might just be your last." All the hairs on the back of her neck stood up straight as she whisper-hissed, "Is that a threat?" "No." The cyborg tilted his head, still perfectly at ease. "I'm just saying your blatant stimulant abuse is going to make you crash and burn sooner rather than later. And something tells me Arasaka doesn't do medical leave for their grunts." Irritatingly, the thing that stung her most out of all, that was being called a grunt, but she wasn't stupid enough to jump at every insult, perceived or otherwise. "Not like I have much of a choice." The mutter slipped past her control. "Technically you do," Magos said conversationally, "but I'm sure you aren't all that eager to discuss the philosophy of free will right now." She gave him an incredulous look as her eye twitched. "Ah yes, the good old, you can just quit any time, Valerie." "Got any actual advice for me, Mr. Ripperdoc?" she asked dryly as the old Chinese cook scooted over and completely covered their table in brightly colored carton packs of steaming noodles. It smelled pretty good if she was being perfectly honest with herself. "First," Magos raised a finger, tone suddenly professional, "you need to find a way to take at least a week off, preferably 10 days. She winced at the very concept of chaining so many of her free days. "And then," he went on as he absently picked up a pair of chopsticks, You need to deactivate all of your regulators and just let your body purge itself for a while preferably eating actual food for a bit. Any advice that won't make me lose my job? She quirked her eyebrow as they both began eating. Well, you did ask for advice. He shrugged, devouring one of his servings with blinding speed. Solutions would be much more effective, of course. And let me guess, V huffed amusedly, much more expensive. The look the cyborg gave her plainly said, and water is wet. Despite the distraction, she found herself entertaining the idea, going to make me an offer now, aren't you? Well, he shrugged, that depends entirely on how our talk today goes, but, he raised a finger, you can either go to a bioclinic and get injected with all kinds of dubious shit that is probably just going to turn into another issue down the line, or, he waved the hand, I can do a manual purge and you'll be right as rain a few hours later. There has to be a catch. She narrowed her eyes. Oh yes. The Borg smirked, showing off his rows of teeth. It will cost you a lot. But, he snapped his fingers as he finished his food, tossing the chopsticks into his maw like an animal. That is for later. His relaxed gaze turned piercing as he leaned in. I believe you wanted to discuss biz with me. She steeled herself and answered, I need a meeting with Jugo Okada. Michael Magos Sobronov. A meeting, I mused aloud. I sincerely hope you aren't devoted enough to Arasaka to try and salvage yesterday's attempt, because I assure you, while you are strong, you won't survive the attempt. She paused whatever she was about to say, and then blinked before her eyes widened in realization. Just how informed are you? Very, was all the answer I gave. Her fingers twisted inwards, but she stopped herself from fully closing them. Right. She nodded to herself before looking me in the eyes again. It was my boss. He wanted Jugo out of the picture. Are you really sure you should be ratting him out right about now? I asked. Fuck him. If I don't at the very least start negotiations with the Okada today, I am dead anyway. She practically spat. Jugo was too hard to control, and my boss made regular use of Shobo to get his hands on a mountain of blackmail material. And elevating him while keeping him weak from the gang war would give Arasaka more sway over the Tigers both locally and as a whole. I finished with a hum. Makes sense. The madman is a fucking loose cannon most of the time. As before, her eyes twitched in her particular manner that meant she was dissecting the statement for every implication it could carry. But, she said, tapping her fingers impatiently, Shobo failed, and Jugo is still alive and now controls all of the Tiger's western territory. Yes, quite unfortunate for your boss how all of his plans backfired like that. I smirked. And for me, Michael, she said, as if the use of my real name was supposed to mean something, I need your help with this, and I'm ready to pay for it. Now you are speaking my language. I chuckled, the volume of which raised slightly at how she deflated after my tonal shift. But I'm afraid I won't be taking money for this exchange. Wisely, she did not immediately jump the gun and try to blackmail me, like her name drop implied. What do you want? Neville Werner, I said after a pause. I want all the info you can get on him. His hobbies, where he lives, the car he drives, the glitter he likes to sniff, where he keeps his pet boy toy. I want everything. She frowned. I can't just… Yes, you can. I cut her off with narrowed eyes. It would be insultingly simple for you to obfuscate that kind of information exchange. Agree to bring it to me at the earliest possible time, and I will give you your meeting. She scowled at being interrupted, but I knew she knew how valuable I found that information and how uncompromising I would be in seeking it. And so after considering it for a long, quiet minute, she nodded. Fine. Excellent. I clapped my hands. Let's go. The corpo. What in the actual fuck? Not 10 minutes after she had accepted the deal, she found herself sitting on a mega-building mansion suite balcony, being stared at by a scarred and eerily grinning tiger claw captain, while Magos was tinkering on some implant on the man's back without even acknowledging her presence anymore. As for how said cyborg got her the meeting, he walked up to a tiger claw and said Arasaka wanted a talk, while lazily pointing his thumb at her. That the guard simply bowed and let them both enter hit her with another wave of surrealism. But she managed to gather herself quickly enough, and she could no longer pretend Magos was just some random contact of Okada. He was obviously considered a higher-up by the claw's rank and file and made liberal use of that fact. She was so utterly baffled by her stroke of luck that she nearly missed it when Jugo Okada spoke up. "So, what does Counter Intel want, now that I've properly bloodied their noses?" Her eyes immediately shot to Magos, but he simply shrugged his shoulders, telling her he had nothing to do with the tiger knowing, which meant Wakako was already acting. Unlike her meeting with Magos, she was not nearly as unprepared for talking to Jugo, and instead of beating around the bush, she answered with a simple peace and at least the appearance of cooperation. "Ha!" The captain barked a laugh, wincing as Magos poked him in the rib. "At least you aren't wasting my time. What do you propose?" He returned just as simply, "And now for the moment of truth." She inhaled slowly. In reality, Jenkins had no idea she was here. In fact, the man had probably written her off by now. But surrendering was never her thing, and she'd be damned if she let the psychopath bury her like that. "My boss tried fucking you over," she said, "and now is trying to fuck me over." The tiger boss snorted, but didn't otherwise interrupt. "What I want from you," she began, looking him in the eyes, "is to agree to have me act as the active contact between Arasaka HQ and your Western Tigers." Ambitious. Jugo narrowed his eyes, though his tone carried a hint of approval. "And why would I agree to this when your corporation has acted against me? The head of your gang wouldn't allow you to act against the corporation anyway," Valerie pointed out bluntly, to which the man just raised an eyebrow. "But if you agree to my proposal, you get to appear as if you are cooperating, meaning Jenkins won't have an excuse to fuck with you for destroying his plans. And," Valerie went on, feeling a slight surge of confidence, "I get to salvage this operation and survive the fuckfest that is my workplace. As for after that," she shrugged, "we can either pretend we don't know each other, or we can do a few favors for each other here and there. We can discuss the details later." Getting some actual cooperation from the tiger would be optimal, but that was a bit lower on her list of priorities right now when compared to actually living to see tomorrow. "A rat with a spine?" Jugo barked a laugh before looking up. "You brought her here, Mike. Is she trustworthy?" The cyborg paused his work on the man's back and looked up, surprisingly honorable for her kind. He mused, voice making it clear the implied insult was on purpose. "Think I should humor her?" Jugo asked, but she knew all of it was a performance. "Try not to open a second front while you are still dealing with Maelstrom." The Borg deadpanned, and then looked Valerie dead in the eyes. As for her, the only reason she isn't a steaming, rotting pile of meat right now is the fact she was honest enough not to rat me out to Arasaka the moment she managed to dig up my history a full month ago. Valerie's blood went cold. "So good on you, Ms. Price." The cyborg went on, eyes completely and utterly devoid of emotion, as he stared straight into her fucking soul. "You might just be a step above the rats you surround yourself with on a daily basis." "Fuck." Jugo grinned and smacked his leg. "Well, with that kind of endorsement, who am I to refuse you?" And called for one of his bodyguards to bring out the sake. But she was too busy to even register that as she was still staring at the Borg's golden optics, the cold, inhuman metal somehow managing to impress both praise at her conduct and the underlying threat of what he was capable of if she slipped. "Magos. As I've said, you haven't proven yourself rotten just yet. Watch your step, V." The sudden message on her agent shook her from her stupor, and finally, after one final glance, the Borg stopped staring her down, returning to his work despite his patient's childish protestations. And despite knowing she had won herself another chance at life, at that moment Valerie felt like anything but a winner. 53, Chapter 53, Triumphs and Theories. The Corpo. The sting of fear and humiliation had dulled by the time she entered the mega-building elevator, and as the metal box began its descent, she allowed herself a breath of relief as the realization she wasn't going to be torn to pieces today began settling in. Oh, she was still very, very frustrated at being outplayed so completely and overwhelmingly. But staying angry at the cyborg who facilitated her survival was a stupid fucking idea, especially with his ridiculously deep connections. Sure, she was a corporate employee, but she wasn't high enough in the chain of command to possess that kind of arrogant self-importance. Yet. Still, the realization that he had been humoring her for the entirety of their conversation stung her pride like a bitch. Valerie slapped her cheeks and inhaled sharply. "Look on the bright side, V." Her previously controlled voice took on its more natural rasp now. "Just means your contact is more useful now." Right, that was a far more productive way of looking at things. Sighing with an emotion she couldn't even identify anymore, she rang up her loaned driver and prepared for what came next. The Arasaka Tower didn't look nearly as foreboding as it did when she arrived in the morning, and the expectant looks of the sharks she begrudgingly called colleagues only threatened to add a pep to her step as she walked into Counterintel's HQ. Most of the fuckers didn't even pretend they weren't just waiting to see the show as she inevitably crashed and burned. "Miss V." Her assistant greeted her with a perfectly professional expression on his face, though his posture made him seem unusually eager. "Mr. Jenkins requested you visit his office as soon as you came back." "Is that so?" Valerie looked the grasping little shit over, somehow managing to keep the cruel smirk from worming its way onto her face. "Thanks, Smith." "Of course, Ms. V." The man inclined his head and stepped back, not even bothering to hide his own smirk now. "I'll deal with you later." She decided and left him behind, patiently passing through all the security checks as she waited to be admitted to Jenkins' office. The moment the security AI cleared her and she walked into the dark room, Arthur Jenkins' face twisted in irritation. "V." He said, the psychopath's usually cold tone far more irritable. "Where the fuck have you been?" "Doing damage control." She didn't quite snap back, but just barely so, before tacking on a quick, "Sir." "Damage control?" Jenkins' expected outburst ceased as his eyebrows rose, his gaze turning evaluating for a quiet few moments before he indicated for the chair across his office desk. "Sit." Making sure to wrestle her emotions under control, she did as she was told and took a seat, just barely managing to stop her vision from swimming as her body relaxed at the much-needed comfort. "Explain," Jenkins ordered harshly. Nodding curtly, she began, "Our operation with the Maelstrom Tiger Gang War." "Your," Jenkins corrected, "operation." How she managed to keep herself from gritting her teeth, she had no idea. "As you say, sir." She agreed dully. "My operation with the gang war didn't go as planned, and I saw fit to do some emergency field work to salvage the situation." "And," Jenkins' eyes narrowed before his frustration bubbled up again, and he waved for her to hurry it up. "Speak, V. You wouldn't be so smug if you didn't have something for me." "I managed to get a meeting with the victorious Tiger Claw," she said simply, not rising to his bait, "and he agreed to cooperate with Counterintel and have me act as the liaison." The CO didn't immediately answer, merely staring at her for a long moment before frowning. "And what happens when he learns about our actions against him? Have you considered that?" "Oh, he already knew, sir. His mother's work, apparently." She half-chirped, much to her internal horror. Showing no reaction to her mockery, Jenkins pinched the bridge of his nose. "And just how did you manage to convince Jugo Okada to agree to this?" "By being ridiculously lucky." Her mind supplied, "He seemed to appreciate my audacity, sir," is what she said instead. Jenkins' eye twitched, and he made a point of looking her over with a mocking leer. Yes, I'm sure the man was transfixed by what he saw. "Don't punch your boss's face off, V. Don't you fucking do it." "And you are sure," Jenkins pressed, "that he isn't just playing along?" "He'll not retaliate, that much is certain," she answered, knowing for a fact that the man was indeed just playing along. "As for actively working for us, that might take me some doing." If he caught her previous exaggeration, he didn't show it, and instead just grunted in irritation. "Fine." It sounded like it physically hurt him to force the words out. "I'm leaving it to you to resolve the entire situation. Make sure the Tiger Claws don't lose their territory in Watson, and ensure their cooperation. Any other projects can wait. This takes priority." Finally, she felt the spark of triumph she desired, and she quickly nodded in acceptance. "Dismissed." Jenkins waved her out with a scowl, and as she stood and turned to leave, he spoke up again. "And V, watch your step." For some reason, the usually ominous warning didn't feel all that threatening this time. Valerie left the CO's office, feeling like she had just gotten a second wind, the victorious smirk she had been suppressing finally spreading on her face and immediately informing the rest of the scum she was still firmly above them. She delighted in each and every one of their supposedly subtle reactions, and all the more so when she walked up to her office and saw an uncomfortable Smith currently sweating like a pig and now shivering under her glare. "Smith," she said, and the man gulped, "we are still on gang war duty, and I want a full and thorough report on every single incident happening out there the moment it happens." The man paled. "Beep. But." Seeing her threatening glare, he clicked his mouth shut. "I don't care if you have to sleep in this goddamn cubicle, Smith." She leaned in, whisper hissing the words out. "But if I find one mistake in your reports, I will have your head. Understood?" The man's back straightened like a rod, and he nodded in defeat. "Yes, ma'am." "Good man." She smirked, patting his shoulder briefly before promptly forgetting he existed and sitting down at her personal desk. The moment the glass doors shut, she slumped in her seat. "Fuck." She groaned, simply staring into the ceiling with thoroughly exhausted eyes. She didn't allow herself to doze off, though, and forcefully sat up before activating her personal computer, inputting her credentials and starting an obscured internal inquest on one Neville Verner. She might have dodged the executioner's axe today, but she wasn't stupid enough to stay indebted to the cyborg that made it possible. He seemed the type to take punctuality very seriously. And who knew, if she gave him enough to work with, she might just happen to have a day where she wasn't feeling like her blood was on fire sometime before New Year's. A girl could dream, right? Michael Magos Sobranov. Thankfully, by the time V and Jugo managed to come to an agreement, well, I call it an agreement, but it was more or less something like this. V said, "Let's not murder each other," and Jugo responded with "Ait," before immediately calling for a celebration of the new alliance and effectively forcing the dead on her feet, woman to down multiple shots of his strongest sack. That was until she finally snapped and glared him into getting on with it. And knowing the madman, that pretty much sold it for him. In any case, while the two of them were doing their negotiations, I busied myself with far more important work and managed to finish my examination of Jugo's Sandavistan in full by the time they were done. To my satisfaction, my prototype was very efficient, even while working with a fleshling's less than robust nervous system. And while there was some strain from Jugo pulling on it a bit too much in his fight, he stopped just before it started doing permanent damage. Though as much as I'd like to call it wisdom on his end, it was probably just dumb luck he lost consciousness at the last possible moment. The little shit had the temerity to pout at me when I told him he couldn't pull that much usage from the Sandy more than once a month if he didn't want to slowly start going stupid. Not that there was much hope for him to begin with. He did agree, though. As for how I managed to make a Tiger Claw captain do something as suicidal as replacing his spine with a prototype Sandavistan model, I fucking didn't, that's how. Before the whole mess with Totentans, I ran the idea of someone desperate enough for momentary power testing it out for me, and the man immediately decided he was going to do it. Because fuck caution and good sense, apparently. And once the idea got into his head, there was no convincing him otherwise, so I made peace with potentially having to scoop his fried brain off the ground and installed the damn thing after quintuple checking everything. This was the first time I almost felt guilty for accepting payment for an implant. To my complete and utter lack of surprise, though, the Bellator MK0.1 worked to specifications. Despite some of the base inefficiencies the prototype suffered from, due to its nature as one, the shift in focus from just overloading the active perception to the subconscious reflexive parts of the brain turned out to be the superior design path. The reflex to cyberware integration just seemed to click better than some of the lesser models I disassembled and pushed the man's reaction and movement speeds to well beyond peak human limits while providing far less strain on the whole system in the process. Still, even as I very cautiously began considering a variant for my own use, a stray thought just wouldn't stop bugging me. No matter how many times I watched and rewatched the fight between Jugo and Powerpump, I couldn't shake the odd impression that Jugo was moving far faster than even my most optimistic projections should have theoretically permitted. Now I knew for a fact I was far more intelligent than the vast majority of people, but I sure as shit wasn't intelligent enough to create a device capable of altering the flow of time on accident. Which is how I found myself spending a good 3 hours playing and replaying the fight while doing downright autistic levels of mathematical calculations to make sure I wasn't just seeing shit. To make a very long story short, I wasn't. And to make things even more confusing, the fact his muscles, shrapnel wounds notwithstanding, weren't shredded into tiny bits from the sheer strain of movement also went unexplained. This inevitably led me to one simple conclusion. The unknown increase to specifications came from the user and not from the implant. It was the only reasonable explanation I could come up with, as I knew the implant itself from inside out, and any other hypothesis I could come up with I had just spent hours disproving. Think, Michael, think, I muttered, tapping my fingers on my work table, before I felt a thought shove itself to the forefront of my mind and refuse to leave Cyberdex. I exhaled in realization. They allow one to transfer their consciousness to the net, but no matter how rapid someone's nervous response is, avoiding at least some lag between brain and icon should be mathematically impossible. Unless. I couldn't help but grin as I slammed my hands onto the workshop table. There is more to the human mind than I had ever imagined. And to think I took it all for granted for all these years. Oh, I needed to start running tests, so many tests. I needed to time my connection to the net and compare it with distance, and somehow record my own brain signals while doing it. Did the corpos know about this? The sudden thought felt like a bucket of cold water tossed on my head, but I didn't let it drown my growing sense of wonderment. It was almost impossible that they didn't possess some kind of understanding of the implications all of this carried. But something told me their imagination was, as ever, limited. To me, in this moment, though, the possibilities seemed endless. I didn't even notice it as my fingers clutched on their own, scraping holes in my table as they vibrated rapidly. Suddenly, I took in a sharp breath and stepped back, rising my hands in front of my face and slowly making them stop their erratic movements. Yeah, I sighed as the rampant signals moving through all of my implants slowed to their normal state. Best take it slow for now. And just as well, as I noticed a message had appeared on my agent minutes ago, telling me of Senko's 2 surviving goons who had come and left a few hard drives in my waiting room before leaving as quickly as they could. But I wasn't looking to replace one thought spiral with another, and instead checked the time only to find it was already 3 in the afternoon, and I was supposed to go fetch Rebecca's crew soon anyways. I hadn't taken 3 whole steps out of my private workshop before said short stack burst into my clinic, practically vibrating with energy. "You ready, Mike?" she chirped as she saw me. "Just about." I shook my head with amusement. "What's got you so excited?" "I miss my tunes, duh." She winked. "And your brother?" I half teased. Her expression soured briefly. "Yeah, we should probably pick the gonk up on the way." "Wait, really?" I paused in surprise. I'm not sure if the asshole even left the safe house. She crossed her arms and grumbled. Probably did just to waste his money on joy toys. "Rebecca," I couldn't help the teasing smirk. "Are you worried for Pilar?" "What?" "No, I'm not," she retorted, but I could hear the briefest hint of hesitation. "I'm just making sure he doesn't die from some weird fungus like a gonk. Only I get to kill him," she finished with a haughty nod. "Right." My smirk only widened as I gave her "I totally trust you for real" look, to which her face gained a slight hue and she looked away. "Fucking gonk." I just chuckled and shook my head, leaving her to pretend sulk as long as she wanted while I went and got the van ready. She lasted a whole 5 seconds. The drive back to the safe house I arranged was surprisingly quiet, as in despite driving straight into Maelstrom territory, we barely even saw the cyberized gonks. And those that we did see looked like fresh recruits with weapons that could generously be called scrap. Despite my increasing, and quite healthy, thank you very much, sense of paranoia, no sudden attack came as we waited for Pilar to extract his ass from the maze of rust, and I inevitably ended up checking both the area and the net to see what was going on. An act which I regretted quite a bit, as apparently even Gangoons weren't complete fucking gonks, and most of them were laying low during daytime to not draw the increased NCPD presence onto their heads. It would seem I was the real gonk all along. Thankfully, I was not left to consider my woes for too long, as the guest of honor finally made his appearance, and honestly, I wasn't sure what else I should have expected. The gangly man looked half asleep, and like he hadn't taken a bath in a good 2 weeks, his unwashed clothes covered in stains of food and drink. Rebecca's grimace at that moment said enough to write a book. Jesus fucking Christ, I couldn't help but mutter. Yeah, she sighed. We both exited the van at the same time and watched his approach with growing horror. Pilar gave us both a wave. Yo, Becca. Becca's input. Pilar. I nodded and tossed him a beer bottle. Having fun? Oh yeah, he grinned, catching it easily. My main man got me some preem BDS a few days in, and I've been… He smirks in a rather satisfied manner, enjoying myself. Come the fuck on, bro. Rebecca groaned in disgust. At least take a damn bath. Meh, he shrugged. Sounds like effort. And tossed his drink back. I took one tiny sniff of the air and immediately regretted it as the man reeked. Decision thus made, I left Rebecca to rage at her gonk of a brother and went for the back of my van. Seconds later, I returned with a hose in my hand and my large can of blood cleaner in the other. I made sure my approach was audible as Rebecca and Pilar got into one of their usual rows, and as I stepped on a bit of rusted scrap, the both of them looked at me. Rebecca grinned. Pilar paled. Keek, come on, Mike. He raised his hands. We're chums, right? Sorry, Pilar. My cruel grin matched Rebecca's, but you aren't getting into my van like that. There was panic in his eyes now. I'll go grab a quick shower right now. Just put that thing down. My grin widened, and just as the tiniest shred of hope appeared in his eyes, I answered, no, and pressed down on the trigger. 54. Chapter 54. Badlands. Michael Margos Sobranov. The sparse streets of Santo Domingo blurred past us as I drove out of Night City. Seeing actual houses instead of skyscrapers felt just as odd as the first time I passed through the area for a courier run over a month back. It was way too open to be comfortable, and so I rarely spent more time here than I had to. Even if El Capitan insisted I visit him up at his perch on the dam whenever I ordered up a custom part for my ride. The man was solid enough to work with, his selection of suppliers was ridiculous, and he could get me anything I wanted as long as I had the eddies. He would have been perfect, really, if not for his constant jabs aimed at my choice of vehicle. People just didn't respect the classics these days. Or he was just disappointed I wouldn't throw thousands of eddies at him for his preem rides. Could be both, really. A pained hiss drew me from my thoughts as I activated the rear camera display on my windshield, revealing a Pilar who was still rolling on the floor like a wet dog, trying and failing to get the blood-cleaning solution to stop sticking to him. Why does everything smell like hospital? He groaned, still scratching at his face. Oh God, it got into my fucking eyes. Stop being a little baby. I chuckled over the intercom, Rebecca snickering next to me. You have optics, and they needed cleaning anyways. Fuck you, asshole. He sat up, suddenly not at all encumbered by his supposed pain. Why don't you shove it in your eyes and see how it feels, huh? I do it after every big operation, I informed him, feeling just a touch smug. Really, if you can't take a tiny little sting, we should have left you in the safe house. Much safer for someone of your delicate sensibilities that way. Ugh, he scowled. Becca, your input is a fucking menace. I know, right? She chirped happily and proudly. Course. He grumbled. Where are we heading anyway? Badlands. I deadpanned and paused just enough to annoy him. A few minutes of driving past the landfill and we should see the Jodes lookouts. The fuck's a Jodes? He made a confused face. Rebecca slumped her forehead against the dashboard. Really? I blinked. Yeah, really. Pilar rolled his eyes. The fuck are you talking about? You don't even know the name of your driver's nomad clan. Honestly, I expected to be baffled, but this was just plain disappointing. Falco is all right, but I don't need to know his life story. The gangly man shrugged with a smirk, before accidentally sniffing the air and scowling in irritation. Fair enough. I chuckled and briefly went over what I knew of the clan in my mind. The Jodes were a southern nomad clan and one of their 7 nations, making them one of the bigger nomad collectives out there. Supposedly, they were honest, good at construction and agriculture, and for the past few weeks, the rest of Rebecca's crew were hiding out with a small family of them out in the Badlands. Now, nomads were simple people, usually tight-knit in how they operated, which, while appreciable to both my sensibilities and their chances of survival out in the open desert, also meant their views on justice were a bit skewed, seeing they tended to banish problematic folks from the collective whenever they got too rowdy. Why would this matter to me, one might wonder? Well, those problematic folks were just as disdainful of city living as the rest of their kind, and usually turned to less than honest ways of making a living after becoming known pariahs to pretty much every nomad clan out there by default. In short, they became raiders. The so-called Raf and Shiv were a self-contained nomad subculture of their own by this point, and NC's local wraiths were the loudest of the bunch. And they really fucking hated the other nomads, usually acting up whenever a family decided to stop anywhere near their territory. All of which is to say that I was completely and utterly unsurprised as we approached the massive garbage landfill just outside NC and saw smoke in the distance, the source of which I quickly identified as multiple burning car wrecks surrounding a Zetatech transport detail. The corpos looked to be winning, and just as another modified Wraith Chevillon went up in flames, the other Raffans wisely decided to call it a day and get the fuck out of Dodge before the rest of them died as well. Zetatech's security team kept hosing them with fire as they retreated, but made no attempt at following them, the soldiers merely double-tapping any grounded wraiths and returning to their surprisingly undamaged armored truck before resuming their journey to the border. No, I raised a finger as my output perked up. We are not shooting up the Corpo truck. Oh, Rebecca pouted. Shaking my head, I sped the van up, giving the Corpos a wide berth and continuing on my way. It wasn't long before we left the landfill behind, and while the sandy horizon looked to be empty, I knew it to be anything but, as soon as I turned next to a large rocky outcropping, I came face to face with a trio of nomads sitting around a large armored jeep. Immediately, all of them stood alert, two of them rushing for cover, while a burly tan man with a cowboy hat on his head stepped out in front, raised shotgun in hand, and called, "You, stop right there." Having expected this, I slowed the vehicle, lowering the window and leaning out to the side, unable to hold down the small smile as the nomads understandably tensed at the sight of me. But their leader was made of sterner stuff than the rest, and merely narrowed his eyes. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" "Magos, NC mercenary," I said, "here to pick up some chooms who have been in your care for the past few weeks." "Right," he said slowly, "and just why should I believe any of that?" Rebecca gave me no time to respond as she opened her door and hopped out. Without a singular care for the gun suddenly pointed her way. "Yo, I'm Becca," she waved. "Falco should have told you about us." There was recognition in his eyes as he nodded. He did, yes. Before twitching his head in my direction, just didn't mention anything about a pet technomancer coming along. "A magic hand I may be at tech," I said with some amusement, "but I assure you, I'm no nomad." He frowned briefly and grunted, "Right, we'll take you to the camp. Follow along and don't make any trouble. I take the safety of my family very seriously." "Yes, sir," Rebecca mock saluted and hopped back in the van. The man's stern facade seemed to crack at that as he let out a small chuckle and shook his head. "Just Zeke will do, kid," before waving at his people to get in the jeep. As I started moving us again, I gave Becca an annoyed look. You know, jumping in front of agitated and armed men isn't always the brightest of ideas. "Well, maybe." She looked up at me teasingly. "If you didn't scare the shit out of them first, I wouldn't have had to do that." "Come on." I waved my hand about as I complained. They've obviously dealt with Fullborgs before, and I would have convinced them to lead the way anyways. "You keep telling yourself that, Mike." She patted my arm consolingly, much to her brother's amusement. "Man," Pilar laughed, "you two deserve each other." "Hey," I shrugged, "at least we don't have to pay for a few minutes of attention." He flipped me off, and we descended into dumb bickering. The rest of the ride went without incident, as the desert dwellers led us on a merry chase around the area past multiple checkpoints, intelligently guiding us through a few signal scramblers before heading to the base proper. Not that it helped them any since I just memorized the way there, but it was still good effort in most cases. To my surprise, instead of an open-air camp, as was the stereotype, our guides stopped in front of a large unfinished tunnel construction, waving down the guards positioned above the entrance as we followed along. We were quickly guided into the tunnel/cave itself, and I found myself impressed with the setup the nomads had here. Despite living in literal tents and trailer parks, I could easily see their equipment was high grade and well maintained, and even the implants, some of them had looked to be solidly built. There were even some non-corporate models. From their technomancers, no doubt. I mused on my nomadic counterparts, paying no heed to the curious onlookers. Ah, right, Rebecca spoke up suddenly, pointedly ignoring Pilar's painful attempts at getting into the pants of one of our guides. Hmm? Zeke stopped. Probably should have told you we saw a bunch of wraiths getting zeroed by corpos on the road earlier. She snapped her fingers. Yeah, probably, he chuckled. But we have our own lookouts, so don't worry about it, yeah? Rebecca just shrugged and fell back into step beside me. And what about you, big guy? The man kept talking as we walked. What's got someone like you coming along with this bunch? Just a favor for a friend, and I felt like going for a drive. I shrugged before offering a question of my own. And what has the leader of the family on lookout duty? The way the others looked at him as we passed them by made his station quite obvious. He didn't overtly react to my discovery. Everyone does their part for the family, he said with a shrug of his own. People look to me because they know they can trust me to have their best interests in mind, but at the end of the day, I'm just another member pulling his weight. I hummed at that, respectable. The man huffed in amusement. Not all city dwellers think that way. Not all city dwellers think, I groused, much to the amusement of my hosts, as a good number of them burst into contained laughter. Here we are, he said as we approached a metal box-like structure carved into the tunnel wall that was probably some kind of tool shed during construction. Falco, he called, got your tunes here. Suddenly reminded of why I didn't feel like coming at first, I took a few steps back as the doors were soon pushed open and the familiar hulking form of Maine stepped out, quickly followed by the rest of his crew. And while the rest of them got to greeting Rebecca and Pilar, the former being glomped by an eager Sasha, Maine's eyes immediately zeroed in on me, his face scrunching up in a brief frown as he lumbered over to me. "What are you doing here?" he asked, near growled. "Don't worry, our business is quite finished," was my sarcastic answer as I raised my hands in mocking surrender. There is no need to hide your aching wallet. Sometimes I just couldn't help myself. Stop. His scowl deepened as he pointed at me threateningly, even if he was smart enough not to try and touch me, sticking your nose in our business. Your business? I crossed my arms, my eyes narrowing. And who told you I'm here for you exactly? He made another low growl at that. But before he could continue, an unfamiliar voice interrupted. Pardon me, Maine. The mustached man I quickly recognized as Falco tipped his hat as he just slid in between us, looking at me with a polite smile. You this Magos I keep hearing about? I am he, yes. I was still half looking at Maine as I addressed the ex-nomad driver. And you must be Falco. That would be me. He nodded, offering his hand. Just wanted to thank you for pulling all of them out of the fire while I was out. Damn scary hearing about it. It was my genuine pleasure. I allowed myself a small smile, returning the handshake and ever so slightly ramping up the glow of my eyes as I gave his boss the stink eye. Fucker just clenched his fist, grunted, and wisely walked away. Probably would have just ended up flatlining all of us if I was there. Falco sighed, not having noticed the interaction at all, so I guess all of it turned out well in the end. Best not to think about that, I told him. It's not that easy, he sighed. Night City doesn't do lucky. So he was just waiting for the other shoe to drop. How does it work anyway? I asked, deciding to distract the man from whatever was weighing him down. You being a part of the nomads while also being a merc. Oh, I'm not part of the family. He shook his head, unbothered. It doesn't happen often, but there is nothing stopping us from leaving for greener pastures whenever we like. We just can't rely on family support when we do. That makes sense, I suppose. I said, and you still keep in contact. I'm guessing that's how you set up this little getaway in any case. Family is family even when you leave. He shrugged. No point in cutting myself off just because I wanted to go racing around. I went to speak again, but suddenly I felt a distant vibration in the ground, my gaze immediately snapping towards the entrance of the tunnel. Rising my hand to silence Falco, I noticed Zeke had tensed and was now exchanging rapid words with Maine, while Rebecca was looking between them in confusion. Confusion that quickly turned to anger as she turned to call me over. But by that time I had already stomped over to the nomad leader. "What's going on?" I demanded, uncaring for the sudden tension around me. As he twisted to look at me, the furious look in his eyes briefly turned to consideration, then confusion. "Just tell me honestly, Techie." He spoke with a deliberate weight as he clutched his weapon. "Did you bring them here?" Immediately, I could detect dozens of nomads aiming at me, though to my surprise, Maine and his group were all keeping their weapons down, even as the cyborg was staring a hole into my side. "Did I lead who here?" I asked slowly, even as I prepared to annihilate anyone who decided to pull the trigger. "The fucking Raffin!" Ezekiel Joad snapped, glaring at me despite being in crushing distance and barely reaching my shoulders. "There is an entire clan coming here, and they came just after you arrived." "Really?" I asked. "Were they watching for new arrivals?" "Is this a joke to you?" he demanded. "Is it a joke to you?" I retorted, and kept my hands down despite wanting to shove the little shit. Why the fuck would I leave myself so vulnerable to retaliation if my goal was to kill you all? Briefly, I was tempted to explain just how easy it would be for me to slaughter them on my own despite their defensible position, and without them ever knowing about it. But now was not the time to play the gonk. Seeing the logic catching up in his tiny mind, I added, "They obviously followed us through long-range observers. Fuckers were probably trying to hunt you down ever since you crossed the border." "Shit," Zeke muttered, lowering his weapon. "Damn it, you are right." And just like that, the rest of his nomads stopped aiming at me. "Told you it would be fucking stupid." Maine growled from next to him. "The fuck? Don't give me that fucking look." He scoffed as I turned to him. "I don't like you, but I ain't some backstabbing bitch." "Right." I nodded slowly, unsure exactly how to feel right about now. "That's enough time wasted." Zeke snapped out, "Help if you want, or get out of the way if you don't, but we Jodes have wraiths to kill." And without waiting for our response, he led his people towards the cave entrance. Seeing them rushing out, my gaze inevitably found Maine's, and despite our irritation with one another, we nodded as one and ran after them, ignoring the calls of the rest of the crew to wait for them. 55. Chapter 55. Raff and Rabble. The Nomad. "Marcus, set up an overwatch topside." Ezekiel Joad snapped orders as he rushed out of the tunnel, quickly noting the messages of the lookouts confirming they got out of the Wraith's way. "Got it." The massive man nodded and started sprinting away. "Celine, bring out the launchers," he said, and Joel, stop pretending to be hungover, you lazy fuck." Seeing the man startle into losing his slouch, all he could do was shake his head in annoyance. The job that the Aldecaldo fixer Dakota offered, from what he was pretty sure was a Kang Tao cell, was damn good Eddie's. It was simple: come in, prepare and supply an operating base, and get out before anyone noticed. Some of his fellow nomads grumbled about the risks, but the money the Chinese were offering was too good, even with the location being the hellhole that was Night City. But it seemed he had really underestimated just how many Raffins openly roamed the Free State. Not one day went by that he didn't hear about a drive-by at least, though usually it was more of an open battle. Really, it was only a matter of time before someone noticed them, and the Wraiths decided they had found easy pickings. And he had drilled his family in preparation for that exact situation. Having guests over complicated things. He'd done Falco a favor by letting his chums stay over. He was owed that much, and no one would have really denied him since he vouched for their behavior. But he wasn't part of the family right now, and he shouldn't be getting dragged into a fight that wasn't his. Gonk would probably try to punch his lights out if he said it to his face. And then there are the others, he thought as he finally reached the entrance, and nearly got a heart attack as, in complete silence, the techie with far too many teeth leapt past him, followed closely by the more familiar stomp of Maine. "Not here yet," Magos noted in seeming disinterest as he completely arrested his momentum by slightly caving the sandstone under him. "Good." Maine grunted, "Gives us time to set things up." The two seemed to enter a silent conversation before ever so slightly nodding at each other. Maine turned back to Zeke. "We'll take point. You get yourselves behind cover." Zeke felt the others look to him, and his expression soured, but he knew arguing over pride during a crisis was stupid. "Right, we'll cover your backs." To minus 80 seconds, Margos droned as the rest of Maine's crew caught up, and the short, pale one ran up to the Borg. "Hey, Mike," she stage whispered, "can I try it now, please?" The previously serious cyborg twitched before sighing. "All right, fine." He reached over and picked up her oversized carnage. "I'll be taking this, though." "Fuck yeah," Rebecca cheered and rounded on Falco. "Come on, you are going to love this." The man gave an awkward, concerned, really chuckle, but still followed along into the monstrosity Magos had drove in earlier. "Just wait for my signal," Cyborg said with a shake of his head. Zeke decided to just ignore the byplay for now and looked into the distance, noting the rising cloud of sand and dust. "They are here." "Want me to try diplomacy?" Magos asked suddenly. Zeke frowned. "Think it will work?" "Probably not." He shrugged. "Worth a try, though." Techies were quite intimidating. "Fine." The family had already set up and spread out properly, joined by the mercs, and Zeke fell in behind a rusted trash container filled with scrap, eyes scanning the over 20 approaching cars, many of which had some manner of turret mounted on top of them. The wraiths wasted no time in fanning out, revving their engines loudly, many of them cheering and roaring over the wall of noise as most began circling the perimeter while a trio of cars drove forward, only slowing as the eerily still cyborg came into view. They stopped a good distance away, one of them doing so by lightly ramming into the Borg's van, which actually made him do a barely noticeable full-body twitch. Out of the lead car stepped a tall, lanky man with a large mohawk on his head and a mocking grin on his face, the rest of the Raffen following suit as he cockily left his only protection. "What do we got here, boys?" He chuckled before lazily pointing his gun at the cyborg. "You here to tell us to fuck off? You fucking tin can?" Margot seemed to pause briefly, almost as if in confusion, before tilting his head. "You seem like civilized people. Are you civilized people?" The wraith blinked before throwing his head back and laughing. "Oh, sir, real polite we are." "So you must know then, that not fucking off." The Borg added a subtle synthetic growl to his voice. "When someone like me tells you to fuck off is considered to be very, very poor form." He let the silence settle for a moment before grinning, the action making the wraith take a startled step back. "So would you kindly fuck off?" The increased growl sent a shiver even down Zeke's spine. "You think I am fucking afraid of you?" came the intelligent answer from the wraith as the man began waving his gun around. "Just because those nomad fucks." Michael Magos Sobranov. "And that is enough of that," I decided as the idiot began prattling along, lowering Rebecca's eye-wateringly pink carnage and pulling the trigger, instantly turning the wraith and the car behind him into fine mush. I did not wait to watch the car explosion, power stomping out of the way as the more distant Gangoon's turrets turned my previous position into a bullet hell. Through my cyberdeck, I observed Maine detonate the rest of the negotiators with his PLS, my van's engine revving up a half-moment later, before the glorious bark of its autocannon began cutting down whichever wraith was stupid enough to rush to the rescue of their boss. I could almost hear Rebecca's crazed laughter from inside, despite the interior being sound-isolated. The surprisingly well-armed Jodes wasted no time in joining the fight, their overlapping lines of heavy weapons fire turning the area around their camp into a killing field that would annihilate anyone stupid enough to stay still for even a second. But the wraiths would never make it that easy for them. The remaining cars sped up, switching to evasive maneuvers with a practiced kind of fluidity, and began hosing our position with a storm of shells and bullets, almost completely suppressing the nomad positions in mere seconds, but not before losing a few of their cars to sniper and grenade launcher fire. My eyes narrowed as I fried a man just before he fired his rocket launcher, my quick hack hitting the rocket a moment later and sending his ride up in flames alongside his buddies. Another Wraith crew didn't seem to appreciate that terribly, and I found myself sliding behind a large concrete roadblock just in time for the high-caliber bullets to start denting holes into it. This gave me a brief moment to properly consider the battlefield. We could win just by holding our ground and hoping to God no one dies, I thought, but having already detected a number of the nomads taking hits, and one falling into critical, I wisely decided, fuck that. We needed to go on the offensive, and I had just the idea. "Maine," I called as I established a connection. "What?" he snapped as he gunned down a number of Raffens. "I have a plan." The steaming Wraith car trying to ram my flank disappeared behind a black blur as Falco drove my own ride into it. Maine joining me exactly a second later as we took cover behind the van. "Fucking hell," the massive man swore as we took cover. "If this gets me killed, I'm fucking murdering you." Flinching away from a spray of fire, I crouched and peeked out lower than the gunman expected me to, blowing the top off his vehicle, with him included with one satisfying click. "But Maine," I snark-growled over the cacophony, "think of your legend. Stupid doesn't mean legendary, you gonk." He spat as he sent another spray of bullets down at the wraiths, and dying to Raffan is fucking stupid. It's only stupid if it fails. I grinned and flicked on my agent Falco, floor it. The adrenaline-chasing racer needed no further motivation as I heard my van's engine roar awake, the vehicle jolting into movement and leaving us momentarily open before the two of us rushed after it, our cyberlegs allowing us to keep up despite its high acceleration. This alone would have been enough to confuse the shit out of the wraiths. Naturally, there was no kill quite like overkill. "Come get it, cocksuckers." Rebecca cheered as she very generously began hosing everything in front of her with thousands of eddies worth of armor-piercing tracer ammunition, and just after I upgraded it with an auto-loader too. Whichever dumb fuck was stupid enough to be anywhere in a 90-degree cone in front of my Maher soon became much less dumb as they were swiftly delivered from this earth and out of their drug-ridden bodies. Anyone intelligent enough to get out of the way and try flanking the APC that was my ride was handily taken care of by Maine and myself, our heavy munitions making short work of the lightly armored cars the wraiths preferred and leaving the injured survivors for the nomads to take care of. Needless to say, when faced with such overwhelming aggression, those Raffans who did not immediately run like their lives depended on it soon found themselves and their vehicles turned into a smoking wreck. "Like fucking whack-a-mole," Maine chuckled darkly as he shot a crawling wraith in the back of the head. The sounds of gunfire slowly dying down around us as the scant few surviving enemy cars left our firing range. Naturally, I immediately embedded my signature into their hardware and uploaded it directly to the Jode's lookout parties. Something told me the survivors wouldn't stay survivors for long. Took out the actually dangerous ones while I was talking with the leader, I said as we began walking back to the unfinished tunnel, waving at the passing van, which was now in need of a serious paint job. The rest was just casualty control for the Jodes. "So that's why," he muttered, giving me a considering look. "Even you need some time to set up then. Did your research, I hummed non-committally. Should I be flattered? "Bah," he scoffed. "Sasha's the one who won't stop talking about you. I'm just forced to listen to her every day." Right, I felt a wry kind of amusement. Her. Maine just grunted at that. I had made my opinion of her intelligence quite clear last time, and with some hindsight I realize how I have come off as a bit abrasive. Too bad, the truth is rarely appreciated, I thought dryly. "Look," Maine spoke up as we started nearing the tunnel. I turned to him but said nothing. "I'll admit," he spoke slowly, as if weighing every word, "that I was suspicious of you, coming out of nowhere like you did." "Too convenient for your liking," I prompted. He grunted in agreement before continuing, "But you didn't have to stand up for these people like you did, and that's worth something." He exhaled, looking out into the distance for a moment. "What I mean to say is I was wrong about you." "Thank you," I half asked, not exactly sure how to feel here. He made a vaguely understanding noise before offering his hand. "We good?" "Well, Mike, that's about as close to an apology as you are going to get." "Fuck it, I'll take it," I decided before shaking his hand. "Yeah," I said, "we're good." Maine nodded, and that was that. Our return to the Nomads was met with many cheers, and Zeke quickly jogged over to us after he was done instructing his people. "Well, I'll be damned," he said as he approached. "I was already going to spread the word about you standing with us, but we owe you a lot." "You let us stay with you, Zeke." Maine waved him down, briefly giving him a firm look of denial. "That is enough. I've learned enough to know pressing you is pointless." Zeke clicked his tongue, much to Maine's amusement. The man who evidently really disliked owing someone moved on to me. "And you, Margos?" He asked. "Hope you aren't as stubborn as this one." "Did they even have something to offer me?" I mused as I shook my head. No need, I helped because I wanted to, not because I was looking for a quick eddy. And before he could protest, I added, I could use a favor from your clan, though. Never know when it might come in handy. And it felt more palatable because of my vague involvement in drawing attention to their current camp. That's fair. Ezekiel nodded, sounding almost relieved. But I'm paying for your ammo and repairs at least. Would have taken a lot more losses if you didn't butcher them like you did. This made me pause before I ever so cautiously asked, Are you really sure about that? He frowned. Of course I am. It's the least I can do. Right. I nodded a bit awkwardly. So, that'll be 21,000 eddies. Maine barked out a laugh, and Zeke, the poor fucker, looked like he had just sucked a lemon. He did agree, though. Autocannon shells were capital E expensive. Now what's this about casualties? I said as the business end of things was finished. Last I scanned your compound, I found no fatalities. For whatever reason, the man briefly looked at me like I had just grown a second head. But he did answer, our doc got hit. He looked away. He is critical as well as two more. We're doing our best to help them, but we aren't sure they'll make it. Maine's lips thinned at what I guessed was a distinct sense of déjà vu, while my own lips twisted into a grin. You are in luck then, for I happen to be something of a doctor myself. And while the rest of the nomads became hopeful at that declaration, their leader seemed to wilt even more. Hours later, I methodically hosed down my arms and mechadendrites, thin, dissolving blood dripping off them like so much water as I felt the distinct satisfaction of a job well done. A sudden loud snore made me look up only to find my assistant, one of the more medically savvy nomads, a somewhat functional drug addict really, with his head lolled back, asleep in his chair from the moment I declared our work finished. Huffing in amusement, I made sure not to make too much noise as I left the medical trailer. A complete and utter silence waiting for me outside as the gathered nomads and mercs looked up at me as one. Whether I succeeded or failed, Zeke insisted we stay the night so his family could at least throw us a party in thanks. But despite his words, no true jubilation had spread as I worked. Well, so much for letting you sleep, Joel. I thought dryly before giving them all the good news. Operations were a success. They are all making it. Half a second of silence passed before the whole fucking cave shook at the cheer that followed, and despite the pain that awaited, I increased my audio receptor's sensitivity just in time to hear Joel startle awake before falling over himself. That will teach you to huff glitter while I'm stitching up your brother, you fucking gonk. 56, Chapter 56, Connections. Michael Magos Sobronov. 6th Street tend to get uppity if too many people from the same group enter their territory, so it's probably best to just stick to northern Santo Domingo if you are going into the city at all. I rattled off, doing biz anywhere else is too expensive if you are looking to stay frugal anyway. I see. Ezekiel Jode nodded slowly. I'll keep that in mind. Still, if you are looking to do anything above street level, I highly suggest keeping those dealings to the fixers. I said, they may take their cut, but they are definitely worth the eddies. He frowned. I trust Dakota. She is an Aldecaldo, but I don't know why I should be giving my money to any of the others. The whole fixer hustle does look quite odd from the outside, doesn't it? The idle thought struck me. Their whole business model is tied to their reputation staying squeaky clean. If you make a deal with them and get them their eddies, they will get you what you want. So it is a guarantee, he asked. Pretty much. I shrugged lightly. Not a perfect one, mind you, but it is definitely more secure than conducting biz on unfamiliar ground on your own. Offhandedly, I flicked El Capitan's details to his agent. He'll probably be able to get his hands on the kind of hardware you are looking for. Consider him vouched for. There was a brief flash of hesitance on the nomad's face, but he quickly masked it behind a nod. All right, I'll take your word for it. And that is probably where I should stop before I start looking like a meddler, I reminded myself. Helping the Jodes cost me absolutely nothing, but as proven by their other guests, things were rarely that simple. Thanks for the info, he said, evidently agreeing with me as he picked up a box of beer cans. But that is enough of the dry stuff. The food should be done by now. Nodding in agreement, I picked up a stack of boxes myself, and we made to rejoin the rest. The party outside the metal shed was already picking up, and the previous tension was replaced with a much more relaxed, jovial air as the nomads celebrated their survival and the mercs celebrated the age-old NC tradition of flatlining gonks. "Took your sweet-ass time," Pilar called as I moved to rejoin the group. Becca here was starting to get jealous. He pointed his thumb at her and cackled. For all of a second before his shin was promptly folded with a mighty kick. "Shut the fuck up, asshole!" Rebecca yelled and smugly crossed her arms as her brother started rolling on the ground and cursing her. Shaking my head in amusement, I set the box down and began giving out the cans, and soon enough all of us were seated around a fire. Most of them on folding chairs, while Maine and myself had to settle for thick metal boxes. And speaking of the hunk of flesh and metal, he seemed to decide to follow through with his previous decision words, and as we both flicked our drinks open, he extended his hand in my direction expectantly. The way his crew watched the entire exchange with bated breath felt almost comical. But I kept any bubbling snark to myself and lightly clinked my can against his cheers. "Cheers," he grunted back, and we both downed our drinks. All 5 of the others made relieved noises, especially the netrunner as she physically deflated at the sight. Maine gave her a slow look before snorting and going back to his drink. And her startled pout seemed to drain whatever tension was left from all the rest, leaving us to actually relax and enjoy the atmosphere alongside the surprisingly delicious barbecue the nomads prepared. "So," Maine spoke up over the din of small talk, "anything big happening in the city?" "Aside from the gang war, you mean?" I asked. "Aside from the tigers and stromers butchering each other, yeah." He nodded. "Well, I thought the new Pacifica fixer seems to have finally set himself up, goes by Mr. Hands and is by all rumors a professional, seems to dislike showing his face too. Too bad he landed in Pacifica." Maine seemed unimpressed. "Well, it isn't like he can take over someone else's turf right now." I shrugged. "All the others are too entrenched, so no easy pickings there, and there are eddies to be made in Dogtown if you know what you are doing." "Maybe if you are looking to get flatlined," Dorio interjected. "Dogtown is a hellhole." "Doesn't mean there are no eddies to be made," I pointed out lightly, especially with the black market they got set up in there. That earned me a few nods of agreement. "You've been?" she asked. "Not yet." I shook my head. The kind of hardware I could find in there is tempting, but I doubt the army of Spec Ops goons Militech left behind in there are all that eager to get a visit from a full-borg. "You afraid of some corpo doughboys?" Maine asked, not quite mockingly, much to his output's brief annoyance. "Not particularly," I said, completely ignoring the implied challenge, "but there is no point in stirring shit up when I don't have to, and I have other less irritating ways of getting what I want." "Boo-rying," Rebecca booed from beside me. "I have plenty of excitement as I am, thank you very much," I quipped, probably too much now that I think about it. We moved on to less exciting topics after that, mostly discussing random rumors or the group's time outside the city before slowly inching towards what Rebecca and myself had been up to, which inevitably led up to me talking about my joining the afterlife and ironically enough reducing the amount of merc work I did in favor of focusing fully on my clinic. Somewhat hesitantly at first, I will admit, but after seeing no particular half-borgs start bitching at me, I began discussing it more animatedly and time seemed to blur, before the nomads finally decided they had given us enough time for ourselves and we were unceremoniously dragged into the wider party. The nomads were so grateful, in fact, that even Pilar managed to score for the night, and while I did not ruin it for him, I made sure to nail a list of medicine used in combating venereal diseases on a clipboard on the unfortunate woman's trailer. Just in case, of course. I also managed to wring out an answer as to why Zeke seemed to be so uninformed about some of the more obvious aspects of doing biz in Night City and why he felt pressured to ask someone he was already feeling indebted to about it. Simply put, the previous leader, his father, died to a Raffan raid alongside a good number of the other nomads, and he was left to pick up the pieces. The moment I pieced the story together, I made it a point to back off and just enjoy myself. No reason to have them relive their trauma just so I could satisfy my curiosity. By the time we were finally ready to leave, the sun had already long since set. But just before we set out, I found myself cornered by Rebecca and a somewhat embarrassed Sasha, the former of whom was grinning ear to ear while pushing the latter along. Hey Mike, she waved eagerly. Sasha wants to ask you something. Damn it, Becca. No, I don't. The self-proclaimed netrunner whined. Come on, I didn't drag you all the way here for nothing. Rebecca kept pushing her though. Becca, I spoke slowly. What are you doing? Helping my gonk of a friend, she declared, so she can stop being a gonk. I'm afraid it is quite terminal. I drawled before I could fully stop myself. Rebecca choked down a burst of laughter, and her chum looked at me like I had just killed her cat. In before that familiar, irritating flash of determination appeared in her eyes. Teach me, she said, more like demanded. And how else could I answer such an earnest request, but with an immediate no? And just like that, she deflated, oh. Ah, come on, Mike, Rebecca smirked. It will be fun. Since when is teaching complete noobs? Irk, Sasha twitched as if shot. Supposed to be fun? I drawled with my arms crossed. Damn. She muttered briefly before realizing she did so, and promptly pretending like nothing happened, she pressed on, we are going to start doing gigs again in a few days. I could totally use some better support. Really, Becca? I asked, more amused than anything, moving on to emotional blackmail already. Is it working? She blinked innocently. Sighing and shaking my head, I took a good look at the two of them. All right, what exactly brought this on? You must know I'm not your greatest fan, so it's got to be something. Sasha winced and Rebecca immediately took that as her cue. Maine has been talking about getting another netrunner on the team. She said with a wince of her own. He says it's so we can do bigger jobs, but Sasha got it in her head he is trying to replace her. He didn't drop this on you today, did he? I asked. That would have been a supremely dick move. No. Sasha shook her head. We've been talking about it for a few days. Well, from what I know about the man, I sincerely doubt he is just going to toss you away like spent garbage. I said after some brief thought, and it's never a bad idea to have some support while net running. Or so I hear. That final bit earned me a wry look from Rebecca. But what if I don't measure up? Sasha asked, though something told me it was directed at herself more than me. That sounds distinctly like a you problem, I pointed out dryly. She sighed in disappointment and nodded. Yeah, sorry. But, I said before she can keep wallowing, as much of a cheeky shit she is being. My output grinned. Becca is right in saying that she could use some better support. Sasha immediately perked up, looking up at me with hope in her eyes. I'll give you some tips, and maybe a few of my more basic quick hacks if you don't prove to be completely incompetent. I said, raising my finger to forestall any interruption. But if you fuck up like you did with the Biotechnica gig again, while Rebecca is with you, I will feed you your own spine. Deal? She gulped before rapidly nodding and taking my offered hand. Deal. I'll contact you when I have free time. I said, not so subtly telling her to fuck off, something she thankfully caught and quickly scampered away, but not before giving Becca a quick hug. Thanks, said Gremlin a bit more seriously now. She really needed that. She needs a lot more than that, I'd say, I snorted. But you're welcome. Our return to North Carolina felt almost eerily silent, what with the road being left completely undisturbed. Destroying the band of wraiths usually patrolling the area to the last man tended to have that kind of effect, I supposed. After we reached the city proper, though, Falco took everyone else to their homes while I drove Pilar and Rebecca to their apartment. And just in time as well, as their rent had been due for a while and they were just about to be evicted, both of them having completely forgotten about it. This naturally led to another shouting match between them, and a few more holes in the wall as Pilar wisely chose life and fled. After making sure no one was about to die, I helped them move back in, but found myself leaving soon afterwards as they were both completely exhausted by the day's events, and I had some very important work lined up for tomorrow. It felt odd, having my room completely to myself after over a month of sharing it with someone, but I didn't bother overthinking it, simply following Vic's advice in removing my mechadendrites before plopping onto my bed face first. Before even a minute had passed, I was out like a light. Walking through the artificial park Arasaka had set up in the center of the Corpo Plaza felt surreal, alien even. Certainly I knew the grass and trees were all mostly cloned and artificial, but even then I had never seen so much green in one place outside of the movies or old-world photos. Hell, the most plant life I had seen in one spot that wasn't just desert shrub was the garden Jugo had in his nightclub, and that was comparatively tiny. Thankfully, I drew only some attention from the nearby onlookers as I kept all of my shiny bits covered and the visor of my biker helmet lowered, making me out as someone heavily modified instead of a FBC stalking the ground between the corporate towers. Still drew some gonk-ass gawkers, though. It's decided, I muttered as I sat on the concrete fence separating the walkway from the plants. I both love and hate this place. First time on the plaza? A familiar light rasp came from my right. Yeah, I said without turning, having already noticed her approach minutes ago. Had no real reason to come before. Didn't know what I was missing out on. V nodded, taking a seat next to me. The Emperor wanted to show off in front of the other corps, and the marketing department made it happen. He must have thrown a lot of money down the drain if he bought the project before Biotechnica could. I chuckled. Don't they specialize in this? They do, she agreed. But what the Emperor wants, the Emperor gets. How very loyal of you, Price-san, I drawled, earning myself a brief glare. And speaking of your marketing department, do you have what I asked for? Yeah, she nodded. Had to jump through hoops to make sure my skimming didn't get noticed, but I managed to get just about everything you asked for and then some. Feeling a spike of curiosity, I finally turned to face her. Really now? Hoping to have me owe you a favor now that you've paid your own? If you don't feel like it is worth one, then you don't owe me a thing. She smirked challengingly before offering me a data shard. I managed to get the access codes to all of his company-provided properties in the city. Absently scanning the shard for any issues, I inserted it into the security port in my arm before quickly skimming through the data itself. Ah. I couldn't help but voice. Why did it not surprise me she meant all of his properties, period? Nodding to myself and ejecting the data shard, I looked back up to V. All right, what do you want? But I found she wasn't looking at me, or really listening to me. Her eyes were unfocused, and she was staring off into the distance while absently holding herself back from swaying in place. Shit, she hissed, one of her hands moving to her face as she began to massage the sides of her head. Sorry, what did you say? I said, what do you want in return? I repeated, already knowing the answer. That offer to fix me still up? She asked as she blinked herself awake. Goddamn bleeding heart. Huffing to myself, I nodded. Yeah, fine. Fuck it. Why not? 57. Chapter 57. School Time. Michael Margos Sobranov. Not one for small talk, are you? I asked after a good minute of silence passed. The half-asleep, barely present V shot me an annoyed glare before holding back a yawn. Teed. Her relief at finally seeing a way out had lasted her for all of 3 seconds before it was replaced by the realization she had to get through the day as she was first. She let out a long exhale before slapping her legs and getting up in one fluid hop. I should get going before someone starts paying attention. Isn't this place the designated clandestine meeting point anyway? I asked dryly, slowly getting up as well. Yes, she nodded seriously, which is why everyone has eyes on it 24/7. Crossing my arms, I asked, and you wanted us to meet here anyway. Why? Because it's just business as usual. She shrugged. You got scrambling tech, right? I do sincerely hope that was a fucking rhetorical. I felt myself twitch but didn't show it. Yes, obviously. Even outside of that, I had already manually removed any identifiable trace of myself from the local net. Then we have nothing to worry about. She waved me down tiredly. People meet here so often, the different intelligence agencies barely pay attention anymore. So why are you in a rush then? I asked. Because I don't want some gonk skulking around seeing me and asking questions. She grumbled, I'm too tired to deal with that. Don't want to end up pushing someone's head into a wall, I half teased. She blinked before answering completely seriously, cleanup is annoying. Ah, I nodded amusedly. That's fair. Her lip twitched upwards ever so slightly. See you later, Em. Later, V. I returned. Remember. I spoke up as she turned her back. The moment you get done with work, you drag your ass to H11-. And use an autopilot instead of driving manually, yeah. She interrupted with a backwards wave. I got it. Hearing the almost childish irritation in her voice, I couldn't help but shake my head. But as she finally disappeared from my sight, I found my mirth leaving me, and I moved on to the original reason I came here. It wasn't a needed step, or even a logical one, but I simply couldn't stop myself. I suppose I simply felt like considering my options before making the decision. Shaking my head at the poor excuse, I left the park plaza, giving the Arasaka Tower a wide berth before approaching it from a different angle, hacking my way through some minor perimeter security and slipping into the corpse territory without a trace. Which is how I found myself skulking in a particularly dark corner of a mildly busy but supremely lavish, corpo-exclusive street leading up to a large building attached to Arasaka's tower. Arasaka Academy, touted as the best place to get a middle/high education in Night City, and probably the place I would have inevitably ended up had I not been born a deformed human nugget. And all too happily at that, it all looked so incredibly underwhelming from where I was standing now. Expensive personal cars driving to and from the surrounding parking area, parents or more often than not, personal servants of some form or another walking the teenagers to school, and the usual rowdy idiocy of my hormonal kindred that followed as they were finally left alone. It was morbidly funny, I supposed, how very human the diabolized corpos could be outside the sight of the common masses. The corporate undertone was still there, of course, and I had no doubt they were already starting to backstab each other as practice. But beyond that, all I saw was a bunch of gonks being gonks, and not the walking excuse everyone outside the corporations used as to why they didn't strive for more than they were born with. The sheep are called sheep for a reason. I decided with a shrug and finally saw what I had been waiting for. Out of a no doubt ridiculously expensive car stepped a familiar face. It had been years since I last saw him, and it showed. He had gained some height, definitely by way of a bio-treatment, and lost most of the baby fat from his face, but it was still definitely him. Nicholas Werner, the closest thing I ever had to a friend growing up. At least he lost the stupid fucking mohawk. I chuckled inwardly, pointedly ignoring the fact his hair was still that eye-watering shade of pink. I expected to feel something, seeing him after so long, either rage or regret, or even happiness. Something. But all I ended up feeling, if it could even be called that, was a mild sense of recognition. It was unsettling, if I was being perfectly honest. But after even the smallest amount of introspection, it was not particularly surprising. In the short period of time I was unbound from the chair, I had met true friends, people who would take a bullet for me just as I would, and already have for them. And a rich kid without a care in the world I was hired to tutor and then ended up playing stupid video games with could simply never measure up to that kind of standard. I stood there observing him for a while longer, watching as he made reassurances to his serious-looking driver before the man ultimately nodded and drove away, leaving behind a downright giddy Nicholas who made it a point to mess his own perfectly groomed hair before rushing over to the rest of the Arasaka heirs. Unable to stop myself from making an amused eye-roll at the sight, I settled on a decision. Within a split second, I was past his security. Saving Grace.exe uploaded. That should keep you away from home and in a comfy hospital bed for a while. I mused aloud and well out of my way. He had done nothing to me, and so I had no reason to extend my revenge to him, though a petty part of me noted how he would be facing a grand struggle once Neville's fortune was ripped away from him by Arasaka for one stupid excuse or another. Corpos didn't really do inheritance if the inheritor in question wasn't already highly positioned in the corporation. Satisfied with that, I gave myself a slight nod and began walking away, only to nearly walk through a pair of what a quick scan confirmed to be a mother and her soon, a pair that looked distinctly out of place despite the son's Arasaka Academy uniform. I would have simply ignored them if not for the immediate flash of recognition in the son's eyes. "Holy shit, you're M!" he went to call out, but was promptly dragged aside by his mother. "Apologies, sir." The red-headed Latina interrupted guardedly, the flash of fear in her eyes impossible to miss. "And to you as well, Ms. Have a pleasant day," I said flatly and turned to leave, but not before flicking her a message. "Ensure your kid doesn't tattle. I don't need rumors of my location being spread." The woman, visibly paled by words appearing in her eyes, seemingly out of nowhere, But before she could respond, I was already walking away, or at least pretending to, as I immediately slinked into a nearby alcove, increasing my audio receptor's sensitivity as I did. "David, mijo," Gloria Martinez addressed shakily. "What was that?" "The most Nova shit ever, that's what," the gonk immediately exclaimed and began excitedly recollecting all the rumors he knew about me, like a kid talking about his Christmas presents. And then I saw a video of him cutting a fucking biotech mech in half with a sword. It was all over the net. Probably should not wear signature clothes if I didn't want to be recognized. Who would have fucking guessed? "David," the mother repeated sternly, "what did I tell you about getting involved with that life?" "Not to," he grumbled, "and I wasn't." He added before she could scold him further, "It was literally everywhere, so I just, gave it a look." "That's right." She gave a long sigh at that. "Forget about it and focus on your future, mijo. I don't break my back every day just so you can live with your head in the clouds or to see you get yourself shot in the street one day." I could practically hear him wince. "Yeah," he said, nodding jerkily. I'll not waste my chance, Mom, I promise." "Good," the woman nodded. "And David, don't tell anyone about who or what you saw." "But, don't," she repeated. "I'm serious." "Fine." He half sighed, half whined, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Content with that, I reduced my audio sensitivity again and left for real this time. Still, though, my passing thoughts refused to completely ignore the duo. The son must be at least somewhat intelligent if he managed to get in on a scholarship program, even if that intelligence was evidently nowhere near maturing. But he was also visibly lacking in motivation beyond his parents' pressure to see things through. And speaking of the parent, the woman wore an EMT jacket, and not even one from the actually respectable trauma team EMT, but some minor district-level meat shop in Arroyo, with a reputation for being closer to a scav operation than an actual business. And a quick background search confirmed the father was thoroughly out of the picture, which meant the woman was trying to push her child through Arasaka's private school for corporate heirs with only a single paycheck and whatever she could scavenge and sell without getting caught. It was almost impressive, in a morbid sort of sense. What a cruel, cruel woman. I had just returned home about an hour ago and was compiling all the data I got from both V and Shobo's stash when I heard my mother calling from upstairs. "That smells delicious," I said as I strolled into the kitchen in lieu of a greeting. "What did you make?" Still busy at the stove, she only half turned as I walked in. "I got my hands on some actual bacon and eggs," she said proudly. "It was surprisingly cheap." "Surprisingly cheap usually means someone is trying to cheat you," I pointed out dryly and started setting the table. "True." She chuckled, "but the seller owed me a favor. I saved his aunt from a bunch of tiger claws a year back, and he promised me a discount whenever I wanted one." "Something tells me he wasn't expecting you to use it on real food," I mused. "His loss," she shrugged, "should have been more specific." He probably still earned a chunky profit anyway." I shrugged. "Probably." She agreed easily enough. "What were you doing this morning?" "Went to the park for a quick meet-up," I said, allowing myself a small satisfied smile. Finally managed to get my hands on some important information. She hummed vaguely as she finished with her work and finished setting the table. The smell was heavenly. "So," she said as we began eating, "you are finally moving against Werner." Had I fleshy reflexes, I would have choked then. Instead, I only blinked slowly. "And how exactly did you come to that conclusion?" "A mother has her ways." She merely smirked before turning serious again. "So are you." "Did you search through my things?" I couldn't help but ask. "Michael." She looked at me sternly. "Even if I was that pathetic." I held down a wince. "I couldn't get past your protections if I wanted to." "Ah." I looked away, feeling a touch awkward. Yeah, that's fair." "Also, it is what I would do," she said softly, though her tone carried a weight that made it anything but soft. "The moment I could, I would do my utmost to rip that disgusting bastard into pieces." I didn't know exactly what to say to that, so I said nothing. "Which is why," she went on, looking me in the eyes, "I am coming with you." "No." My response came before I even fully registered her words. "Fuck no." She merely raised a single eyebrow. Did I give you the impression I was asking, Mikey? What? I went to rant, but stopped myself. Look, Mom, you are unstable, she interrupted, eyes narrowing, broken. Rendered temporarily fragile, I corrected weakly. She seemed just as unimpressed with my choice of words as I was as her second eyebrow joined the first. Look, you can't stop me, Mikey, she interrupted, voice still perfectly soft, and you know it. Realizing this was going nowhere, I decided to change my approach even if it made me feel disgusted with myself. And what if you lose it in the middle of the job? I asked. My eyes narrowed. What then? Is ripping the fucker to shreds worth our lives? Her answer came after a few seconds of thoroughly terrifying glaring, no. She said, but I'm still going with you. I went to slam my hands on the table in frustration, but she spoke up before I even raised my hand, though calling it a furious hiss would be closer to the truth. Michael, he killed my husband. Feeling the wind disappear from my sails, I simply lowered my hands and sighed. What exactly was I supposed to say to that? Look, son, she said, making me look back up with her right hand. I'm feeling much better, and you can't spend your life looking over me like I'm about to break at any moment. And how can you be so sure? I asked, feeling both helpless and irritated. What's to say it isn't just your anger talking and you are committing protracted suicide? Well, son. Her tone shifted, and I found myself blinking as she smiled. I suppose you will just have to trust me on this. Tisk. I clicked my tongue and looked away. She made a vaguely triumphant noise and returned to her food. Like she didn't just ask me to risk her life needlessly. All right, Michael, enough moping. I grumbled internally. You can't win, so you just have to make sure your fears don't come true. Yes, much better. Not even a minute passed before I came up with a plan of action. I'm updating your subdermals and armor plating, I told her, and I'm giving you a full software optimization. There he is. She smiled at me, much better. Feeling like a scolded child, I just kept grumbling and returned to my food. Fuck, those eggs were good. The corpo, the constant twisting of her vision, seemed to only grow worse with each step she took, making her nearly stumble into the almost jarringly well-appointed waiting room of Margos's clinic. Within moments, the doors to her left opened and she entered the clinic proper. The equipment within looked to be as close to state-of-the-art as one could find outside of an actual corporate base, at least to her eyes, and was filled to the brim with what she could only guess were custom pieces the cyborg had built on his own. And speaking of the metal man, he was currently hunched over a ripper's chair, setting up a series of fluid containers filled with some kind of grey goo alongside a number of injection needles and shiny clean scalpels. Stopping what he was doing the moment he heard her enter, he straightened himself back up and turned to face her with an eerie half grin on his face. RV, Margos waved, welcome, welcome, said the spider to the fly. Her mind supplied on its own, and as if by invitation, she saw something on Margos's back twist before a trio of coiling snake-like limbs covered in blades, drills, and pincers emerged from under his coat, all of them moving with a terrifying fluidity and precision and joining his arms in the welcoming gesture. Before she realized it, she had taken a step back. Don't you worry. The cyborg rubbed his hands, his voice taking on a mildly deranged tinge in her mind. I'll have you back to 100% in no time. Valerie gulped. 58. Chapter 58. Planning Payback. The Corpo. For the first time in recent memory, she felt herself come awake not to a blaring mental alarm, but with a comfortable and deliberate slowness. Unfortunately, such feelings were utterly unnatural for her, making her ingrained reflexes kick in as she suddenly sat up, her eyes snapping open as she took the clearest breath she had in years. She was still in the clinic, she realized, and not alone. A few feet away from her, Margos stood hunched over another ripper table, talking to another patient. Try moving the hand now, he instructed. The glitches should be completely gone. There was a whirring sound as the patient did as instructed, before an accented voice responded with wonder, It is so smooth. Thank you, Margos-san. The cyborg merely hummed in mild approval. Your boss has already covered your bill, so you are free to go. She did? The man briefly gawked before catching himself. I mean that's great. It is, the cyborg asked with mild sarcasm. Probably, the man muttered before getting up from the table. Thank you again, Doc. I'll get out of your hair. Margos escorted his patient out and returned with his gaze focused fully on her. You're finally awake. How do you feel? What do you mean, finally? Valerie immediately asked. How long was I out? 12 hours. The Borg shrugged, his unnerving multi-pupiled eye clicking and whirring as he ran scans while he talked. It is already morning outside. She felt a flash of panic. You did take a day off, like I instructed, right? The Borg gave her a pointed look. Yeah. She nodded, allowing herself to relax. Ah, it seems our Japanese overlords have you well trained. He chuckled, to which she wisely just flipped him off. Everything seems to be in order, he said, completely ignoring the gesture. You will need to eat a bit more to get yourself back in balance, but your health should be fine, at least until you inevitably fuck it up again. He finished with an annoyed mutter and waved her up. You can get up now. And she did, and nearly stumbled at the lack of discomfort in her everything. What did you do? Exactly what you asked, was the simple answer. I'll not clue you in on the details for obvious reasons, but let's just say my work was comprehensive, and leave it at that, You will enjoy the results in any case. She was annoyed, but not any more than when she went under the knife for any other ripper, and she could admit in the privacy of her own mind that everything seemed to be working as advertised so far. That is when her biomon decided to be noisy again, and the comprehensive string of notifications made her miss a step, which is when she absently looked down and just now realized she was wearing a hospital gown instead of her own clothes. Her eyes snapped up instantly and were met with reproachful gold. Kindly skip the scandalized Princess Act V. I am a doctor. Her gaze narrowed, but she knew he was right and wasn't particularly shy to begin with. Yeah, fine, she said with a huff. Do you even have a license to call yourself that? V, he said patronizingly. We live in a city where the law is a suggestion at best, and the only way for a man to get even a chance at official recognition is to sell his soul and kidneys to the closest corporation and slave away for literal decades. He made a pause. So yes, of course I have a fucking license. The deadpan delivery made her chuckle despite herself. Yeah, that sounds about right. Margos rolled his eyes. Those tigers are useful for something at least. Not a big fan of our mutual friends. She quirked an eyebrow. Complaining is my God-given right. He said, and I will use it as much as I like. What a perfect non-answer. Your clothes are on that table there. He pointed behind her. Get dressed and go home and get some actual rest. I know my work chair is very comfortable, but it isn't up for rent. How sad, she said dryly and went to do as he asked. Less than a minute later, she was walking out of the clinic feeling like a million eddies, but paused just as she reached the exit, turning back to the cyborg she called, Hey M. He looked up from the laptop he had moved on to already. Good luck. He blinked at her and then simply inclined his head. Satisfied, she stepped out of the clinic and into the bustling mega-building floor, taking deep breaths of the relatively clean air and marveling at the lack of resistance. She had not expected the change to be this dramatic, or even anywhere near it if she was being honest, and it only reinforced her certainty of her decisions. But she could worry about that later. It has been a while since she simply relaxed. A memory flashed in her mind and she perked up, allowing herself a small smile. I could go for some noodles. Michael Margos Sobranov. Chuckling at the corpo's words, I stopped paying attention to the security feed and returned to my data scrolling, though I allowed my focus to loosen slightly as my thoughts trailed back to my work yesterday night. Getting a string of data that annotated the situation as unfavorable was one thing. Looking at the absolute abused mess that V's body was another entirely. The escalating situation made her push herself beyond all reason, and multiple organs had suffered heavy damage, slowly approaching the catastrophic. The cynic in me wouldn't be surprised if that was just another way for the Corps to control their workers. By making them have no choice but to buy in on their affordable cyberware packages, cyberware that just so happened to have backdoors that have backdoors, they would have literal control over their lives, a gun permanently pointed at the backs of their heads. But I should not let myself get distracted by conspiracy theories, probable as they are. Solving V's problem ended up being both simple and irritating. Simple because nanomachines were utter cheats when it came to medicine, and all it took was just injecting a bunch of them and then manually extracting any toxins and fixing the damage. Took me less than an hour. And deeply irritating because I found myself having to cheat in the first place. Fixing her without weeks of chemical therapy would have been impossible otherwise, and I needed to keep her awed and at least passably loyal, or at least the closest equivalent a corpo had for the concept. And stretching things out was just not as impactful. It stung my professional pride for reasons that would no doubt be found insultingly stupid under even the most minor scrutiny. But I was a hormonal teenager, and so I got to be stupid every once in a while. I had more important fish to fry in any case. A gala was to be held in the Arasaka Tower in 2 days, and my target was known to always leave before the unofficial after-party got started, preferring to keep to himself whenever he could get away with it in his position. And he had already made it known he would be spending his night in his Charter Hill mansion afterwards. This made me suspicious at first, but a quick call to V confirmed it was just good corporate practice to leave yourself open for visits and gifts, as it made the customary backroom deals that practically ran the corporations far less tedious. The very idea was so utterly mundane and shallow it had completely slipped my mind, but I suppose the corpos did like their efficiency. And it wasn't like they were announcing it on open channels for everyone to see. The data came directly from Arasaka's own internal servers, and that would simply have to be enough. I had what I wanted, and I already come up with a plan of approach that should see us drawing the least amount of attention possible and allow us to slip out just as silently, if everything went well. Inevitably, the planning session had my thoughts drifting back to V. This would be the perfect opportunity for her to sell me out to Arasaka, what with the opening being time-limited and the property isolated enough for a smash and grab. But I was ultimately secure enough in the knowledge she wasn't short-sighted enough to go for it when she could keep a hidden card for herself against her colleagues. And perhaps naively I believed there to be a shred of decency in her, despite her corpo rat status. Naturally, I still contacted Rogue and made some preparations just in case. The other end of my research proved to be less immediately useful. Shobo's data was a wealth of information, but only small parts of it related to Werner, and even then they usually detailed their business dealings with a few potential meeting points, and not anything that could help me with my goal. There was a scan recording of Werner noting that the man employed a razor monowire for self-defense alongside a standard high-ranking Arasaka Rat cyberware suite, but that was barely even worth mentioning. Still, there was no reason not to profit from all the other information, and many of the businesses and stashes listed had yet to be recovered by the wider Tiger Claws. Briefly, I considered just leaving it as is. Dragging people under the tiger's proverbial yoke seemed like not the most gentlemanly of moves, but they had worked with Shobo, and that was enough guilt by association for me. Though I did make sure to mark all the dollhouses and hire Jones to have mercs sent there to free everyone and send them on their way with some pocket money. The fat paycheck I got from the downright giddy Jugo more than made up for it. The sudden opportunity for consolidation was a godsend after the loss of morale the gang suffered in their war with Maelstrom, and he took it with his usual lack of hesitation. Maybe I should hire a few distraction crews as well. Or would that be drawing more attention instead of diverting it? That's enough overthinking it for now, I muttered and stepped away from the laptop, needlessly stretching my back as I did. Only one step left. I looked over to my workshop and through the wall to find that the printing process I started hours ago was still not finished, which meant I had some time left to kill. Hoping against hope for a miracle, I walked upstairs only to find that Mom and our guest were missing from the living room, and after a quick and I will admit mildly worried scan, I found the two of them in one of our unused rooms in the back. And what I found inside made me pause, though mostly out of mild bafflement. Mom and Misty were standing across from each other, and the latter was currently trying to imitate the former's fighting stance and doing, well, she was enthusiastic, and that had to count for something at least. Mikey. Mum immediately noticed me and greeted me with a smile, though it disappeared as soon as it came. Is your Arasaka friend gone yet? She was not all that happy to learn I was working with one of them, and what a fucking understatement that was. Yes, she left about an hour back. I said, leaning back against the wall, with every motivation to stay on my good side too. For how long? Mum asked tersely. Until it is more profitable for her to sell you out. You know what I can do. I shrugged. What is profit when compared to another chance at life itself? She made a pinched face, but didn't press me further. We both knew that having a contact in one of the world's most powerful corporations was a must if we wanted to avoid a lot of potential trouble, but that didn't mean either of us had to like the fact. Hi, Misty, I turned to my other guest. Sorry about not saying hello earlier, I had some patients to take care of. It's fine, Mike. She smiled, absently wiping her neck with a towel. I know how hectic running a Ripperdoc clinic can get. Vic probably has 10th of the trouble I have. I complained for the heck of it, but she just shook her head and chuckled. You underestimate how often we have to deal with angry customers. Ah, I voiced in realization. Yeah, I can see how people would turn stupid without the unspoken threat of ultraviolence. A threat I made by merely existing. Both of them laughed. So, I said, deciding to shift the topic, what made you decide to learn to throw hands all of a sudden? While my mouth said one thing, my eyes said another. Did you manage to convince her? It wasn't Mom that called Misty over, but myself in the vain, foolish hope her friend could do what her son could not, and convince her not to be a gonk and stay home while I dealt with everything. Evidently, it failed completely, as Mom flashed me an amused glance. Misty made a minute shake of her head, earning her own amused look from my mother. An unfortunate young man tried mugging me, but I got away from him in time. And you decided to learn only now? I couldn't help but ask, feeling a flash of resignation deep inside. You do realize you live in Night City, right? It just never seemed like the right time. She smiled as she delivered every procrastinator's excuse ever. Well, at least you are trying now. I shrugged and looked to Mom. Think you can get her in shape before the 5th Corpo War? If she doesn't give up. She smiled and it made her friend shiver. I give her even odds. Misty's expression turned briefly strained before she smirked back and raised her hands with enthusiastic poise. Oh, I'll show you Lana. Watching the poor woman get repeatedly folded under the excuse of instruction quickly stopped being entertaining and instead just a bit sad, which is why I wisely left before I was invited into the beatdown. I stood in my workshop, slowly wriggling the freshly modified fingers of my left hand. They were longer now, their tips slightly more claw-like than before, and their joints lined with tiny exhaust ports, and their metal shell seemed to reflect light slightly better than the rest of my baseline titanium. The idea came to me suddenly, but once I understood the simple elegance of it, it refused to leave me. Back when I had my eureka moment about the abilities of the human mind, I carved lines through my titanium table merely with my overexcitedly vibrating grip. Combine that with the fact I needed a subtler way to get through physical obstacles than just running through them, the idea pretty much came together on its own. Obviously, I didn't content myself with just making my fingers more resilient or prone to vibration, but went the full mile and added thermal projectors to each digit of both my hands, alongside an enhanced grip at the cost of some precise mechanical manipulation. I had my mechadendrites for that now anyway. My core fulgur provided all the power the modification would need, and the platinum-titanium alloy I cooked up would ensure my fingers would not melt off without considerable abuse. Now all that remained was to see the prototype in action. I turned away from my work table and to an 8-inch thick sheet of the same titanium I used for repairs, standing at around my height. Wasting no time, I calculated my posture before flicking the mental switch, activating the thermal projectors and throwing a violent swing at the test dummy. There was a flash of orange as my fingers immediately heated up to the point of glowing, and it was followed by a downright ear-bursting screech of metal on metal. I pushed through with the strike, feeling the sheet give way only a split second later and retracting my hand with a mental deactivation command. The steam soon cleared from the improvised test dummy, and I felt myself pause at what I saw. The claw had managed to completely and cleanly rip through the entire thing, despite the fact my fingers were simply not long for that to happen. One quick look at the back of the sheet confirmed my suspicion, as I found that the rest of the metal simply melted away with the heat. Satisfied, I rose my new Corvus Mark I and found it almost completely unblemished, save for the steam wafting off from the exhausts. You will do. 59. Chapter 59. Best served cold. The mother. They landed on the soft concrete of the sewers one after another, leaving no sound behind save for the creaking of servos, audible only to the augmented and the slightest shudder in the filthy stream of water running by them. Would you look at that? Mikey Foe whispered, actually functional sewers. We are in Charter Hill, she agreed. Bold of me to expect things like basic infrastructure, I know. He shook his head. Let's go. Our entrance is 10 minutes north-northeast. They abandoned their levity and began skulking through the narrow tunnel, eyes peeled for any potential surprises. Being fully kitted out again felt good for Svetlana, the familiar weight of body armor and her weapons fitting her like a second skin she had forgotten she had. It was like being alive again for the first time in what felt like a year after helplessly crawling through the mud. But she knew better than to give in to the feeling. She had already tasted the consequences of being lulled into a false sense of security, and she wasn't enough of a gonk to allow their well-deserved revenge to turn into a shitty cliché drama at the worst possible moment. This was simply an errand that needed to be dealt with before they could move on with their lives, nothing more. Michael, raising his hand, stopped her in her tracks. They had reached the security line. Cameras disabled, he said, and they walked up to the metal wall, cutting the gated parts of Charter Hill from the rest of it. He stood completely still for a few seconds. And detection systems are off too. This is ridiculous security, even for a rich corpo residence area. Should we expect an alarm? She asked. It isn't that ridiculous. Her son said just a bit smugly, otherwise I'd have just had us fall back. He shook his head. Fucker isn't worth risking our lives. She smiled despite herself, before looking down. Please don't tell me you expect us to go under the wall. She really didn't like the idea of swimming through sewer water. We wouldn't fit anyway. He shook his head and approached the wall. Thankfully they settled for reinforced steel instead of anything more expensive. He shouldered his shotgun and suddenly the fingers on both his hands lit up before he rammed them directly into the metal, making it groan loudly as he slowly and methodically ripped a passage through it. Let's hope no one heard that, she heard him mutter as he stepped through the hole. We have 2 hours. Svetlana nodded and followed him inside. The sewers of the private section were far more narrow than their public counterpart, and every second twist or turn had a security system set up for the home above it. A death sentence for anyone without a dedicated netrunner watching over their shoulder. And a complete joke with her son present as they simply strolled through the murder corridor without a sound, quickly reaching their destination and climbing past the row of disabled turrets. The instant they were under the night sky again, both of them scampered away from sight and under a nearby artificial hedge, giving them a good view of the Werner Manor, whose walls they had just completely avoided. It was a massive 3-story luxury home, surrounded by so much greenery it probably cost more than the manor itself, up to and including a tiny hedge maze and an outdoors pool, because the fat fucker just had to rub it into her face how far he got by being a backstabbing little bye. A metal hand lightly stirred her shoulder and her eyes snapped to the right. You good? Her son's golden eyes looked at her with concern. Yeah, just a bit pissed. He looked away and nodded solemnly. One day we will make this look cheap. Her moroseness was almost overtaken by a bout of delighted chuckles, but she managed to hold back. And just in time, guard rotation turns optimal in 10 seconds. Get ready. Each second of the mental countdown felt like a small eternity. Security is disabled. Michael informed coldly, uploading ping now. Red outlines filled her vision. You take the left, I take the right. Don't stop until they are all dead. He rattled off, go, go, go. They sprang out from their hiding spot in a blur of motion, the 2 guards marching by them, barely having the time to twitch before one had his head sent flying by the swing of a thermal katana. The other found his head twisted aside by 180 degrees, her arms barely even feeling the resistance as she ended him with a satisfying crack. Neither she nor Michael wasted time turning to each other and instead rushed to finish their work, systematically ambushing the guards and killing every single one of them silently. as they made a full circle of the compound before meeting once again in the back. "All guards are down," Michael said, habitually flicking his sword before attaching it to his back. He breathed in and grinned. Time for the main course. She returned the expression, and they slunk into the manor. There were no guards inside, ostensibly to provide some actual privacy to the resident corpo rat, and more likely because they couldn't be trusted with any information they might catch, which left just the automated security to bar their way, the end of which was completely predictable. "Clear," Michael voiced as the last security drone landed and quietly deactivated. They rushed up the stairwell and stalked up to the wall of the main living room, only to pause as they heard a familiar voice from within. "You want me to what?" Neville Verner's voice was filled with anger as he growled into his phone. "Hitoshi, while I do appreciate what you did for my son, it isn't nearly enough for me to go against Yorinobu, at least not without the Emperor's direct instruction." "Why is he here?" She absently registered Michael's frustrated mutter, but Verner's scoff drew her attention away. "Yorinobu-sama, yes, apologies. Point is, you are going to have to give me more if you want me to go anywhere near that shitstorm." Silence stretched as the caller responded, making Verner's voice turn tense. "You wouldn't." His voice caught. "Fine, you bastard." He growled, "But you owe me for this. Double my usual for the same price. My other supplier dried out." "Good." He scowled. "Don't be late." He shut the call, and even through the wall they could hear the creak of his phone as he squeezed it in anger. "Dad, shut the fuck up." Verner snapped at the other person in the room, followed by a loud crack and a pained yelp. "I don't know who the fuck you offended to get infected by a high-grade demon, but you cost me a lot of favors today, boy." "Michael Magos Sobranov." "Ah, that would explain it." I mentally deadpanned. "Great job, Mike." "I already told you I didn't provoke anyone." Nicholas snapped back at his father angrily. "Shut the fuck up." But the man was having none of it. "You better stop fucking around or I will." I tuned out the rant and looked to my mother. Nicholas wasn't supposed to be here. "What do we do?" She narrowed her eyes slightly. "No witnesses." "Fuck no." I immediately shook my head. "He did nothing to us." "He will if he survives today," she pointed out coldly. But I was firm in my choice. "Number. We wait until he leaves." She scowled but nodded. "Fine." Thankfully, we didn't have to wait long, as the shouting match ended soon enough, and the son slammed the doors on the way to his room. A knockout demon followed after him, which we took as our cue, and as one burst through the entrance, far too quickly for the fat corpo to react in any meaningful way. Before he even managed to drop his cigar and stand up, I was already behind him, folding his arms into a painful hold as my mother stopped in front of him. "Hello, Nev," she said with pure hatred in her voice. The fat shit's eyes widened in both pain and surprise. "Svetlana?" he asked disbelievingly. "What? What do you think?" She scowled and promptly stomped one of his feet, shattering every single bone held within and making the man scream out in pain. "Why did you do it?" she asked as the man finally stopped making so much noise and instead began breathing painfully. But there was still some spite left in him. "You are a dead woman." The expected backhand cracked a few teeth, but she managed to not snap his neck. "I asked you a question." "Even if you somehow managed to get through my security," Neville slurred with pure hatred in his eyes, "you aren't getting out of this alive, bitch." I squeezed. "Fuck," he cursed as his bones snapped like tinder. "Are you sure about that?" I leaned into his ear. His eyes snapped to me as much as he could manage, a cyborg. He hacked a laugh. "Whose dick did you suck to get that kind of money?" More bones snapped, but the man just laughed through the pain. "Ha ha ha ha!" He wheezed. "Oh, I know who you are." He laughed. "You are Gregor's pathetic little pet project. Tell me, how does it feel to be the only reason your father couldn't advance in over a decade?" "My pride is overwhelming." I growled and headbutted him, cracking one of his optics. "Ah, fuck," he screamed, unable to even clutch at his head. We gave him a few moments to catch his breath. "So that is it." He breathed heavily, the fight slowly leaving him as he realized no guards were coming for him. "You came here to kill me then. Do you really think Arasaka will let you go after you removed one of their executives?" "Not if they don't find out anything." I informed him. "Besides, you don't look nearly Japanese enough for them to actually care." He made a sound that made it seem he wanted to both spit on me and agree with me at the same time. An open-handed slap drew his attention back to my mother. "You still haven't answered my question, Neville. Why did you kill him? You had so many better options." He looked up at her, eyes full of anger and humiliation. "Because it was expedient." He smiled spitefully. "Expedient?" She took a step back. "We were friends for years." She muttered, horrified, "We were there for you when your wife died. And you killed him because it was expedient?" "Yes." Neville grinned widely. He was getting ideas about promotions, about becoming a peer. He practically spat. Removing him was simply the correct choice. Mom's arm blurred, and in a blink, Neville's jaw was cracked, and half his teeth had flown out of his mouth, in before she proceeded to kick him directly between the legs. With a fully titanium cyberleg. The fat man's howl was so loud I could only hope the neighboring security forces didn't have augmented hearing. But I still made sure not to let him twitch. And just as well, as that was the exact moment I heard someone rush through the door behind me and felt the ping of a tiny pistol bullet bouncing off my shoulder. Before I could even register what had happened, Mom's arm snapped up, pistol out and aiming behind me as she unloaded her entire magazine in one swift burst. Already knowing what I'd find but unable to stop myself, I turned back to see Nicholas's tumbling body, his vital signs flatlining less than a second later as mercenary marksmanship was not to be fucked with. And as my scan told me of the cyberdeck stuck in the back of his head, filled to the brim with defensive auto-hacks, I realized I had pretty much sentenced him to death myself. He took up the gun. I shook my head, feeling the slightest tinge of sorrow. "It's on him." Neville disagreed as the scream of "no" that ripped from his throat was the first time I had heard him voice genuine panic or despair, his broken body pathetically attempting to rip itself from my grip and crawl over to the corpse of his son. My eyes met my mother's, and we nodded. Mistake or not, we were only getting started. The rat. Neville Werner had no idea how he was still conscious, much less alive. Every single nerve in what remained of his body felt like it had been set on fire, and his mind was still reeling from over an hour of the surgical levels of butchery he had been subjected to. Each and every one of his limbs had been methodically removed piece by piece, while a cocktail of sensory enhancers ran through his veins, no matter how much he swore, and then pleaded, and then outright begged. The butchery continued without a single mistaken twitch. All that remained of Arasaka's director of marketing for Night City now was a human nugget, with only his left eye remaining, positioned so he could look down at his dead son. But Neville was not broken, despite the efforts of those fucking street rats. They made the fatal mistake of leaving him alive. And they would regret it for the rest of their pathetic little lives. The windows of his home burst open as the trauma team Aerodyne deposited a squad of medics directly into the room. The professional security team immediately clearing the room while their doctors rushed to Neville. "Patient is critical," one noted coldly. "Prepare stimulant injection." The other agreed, "Platinum package coverage." Neville felt his pain dull behind cold satisfaction. He would get out of here, and he would make them pay. Which is exactly when the microwave device shoved into his neural port activated, and he was treated to one last bout of agony as his brain was cooked to exploding. The trauma team operatives took rapid steps away from the detonated corpse, guns raised in caution until they realized it was a one-off. Patient was booby-trapped. The lead said, "Make sure to note that down in the report, I'm not losing our bonus." "Sure thing, Echo." The other doctor nodded. "Let's check on patient too." Echo said, "Watch for more traps." "Yes, sir." Michael Magos Sobranov. Our escape from the compound was somehow even easier than our approach. Even if we were pushing it by staying as long as we did, the alarm didn't activate until we were already out of the walled community within Charter Hill. I felt a mental ping as we exited the sewer system and smiled. Kill confirmed. Mother exhaled, her shoulders slumping. Good. Serves the bastard right. "Was it worth it?" I asked, mostly to myself. "Yes." I felt a hand land on my shoulder. "Now we can finally move on." I nodded jerkily, happy that we got in and out without complication, and quite satisfied with the revenge I managed to extract. But for some reason, I just couldn't stop feeling like I lost anyway. stop moping. Mom patted my shoulder. Let's go get some pizza. I feel like celebrating. I looked down at my bloodied hands, then back at her and shrugged. Pizza sounded just about perfect right now. 60, Chapter 60, Assassination Aftermath. Michael Magos Sobranov. Here you go, boss. The perpetually grinning fat man working the kebab stand shoved a massive steaming portion of synth meat into my hands. Thanks, I muttered absently and mentally tipped the man, which only made him grin wider. Unnerved by the cheer, I quickly noped out of there and went to rejoin my mother, who was currently merrily chewing down on her pizza while sitting on the mega building's inward-facing fence, her legs dangling as she hummed some tune I couldn't recognize. From the moment we walked out of that sewer, we said not a word about what we had done. We simply got into the van, cleaned ourselves up, and returned to H11, though not before making 5 stops along the way to throw money at the most well-known pizza places. And yet, even after going through so much food, I still felt like chewing on something. Have I gone and became a stress eater without noticing? Well, at least I can't get fat. I decided with a shrug and joined her on the fence. Neither of us said anything for a while, simply enjoying the peace despite the hubbub surrounding us. Surprisingly, it wasn't me who broke the silence, but a prolonged sigh from my right. You have no idea just how long I've been waiting to get my hands on that fucking rat. Years, I said pointlessly. It felt like a decade, she said. I had little else to offer to that, but a shallow nod. There is only one thing I regret, she trailed off. Giving her a sideways look, I prompted, that it had to happen in the first place. Ha, she chuckled lightly. Yes and no, my brilliant boy. She shook her head, the sad smile on her face disappearing behind a flash of manic hatred. I regret we couldn't drag him with us. I looked away. We agreed on it already. Get in, get it done, clean up every trace that could identify us, and get out. We get our revenge and move on, no more than that. I know, Mikey. She took a calming breath. I know, but I am still so fucking furious, especially after what the bastard said. He was being a spiteful little rat. I told her, don't let him rob you of your peace from the grave. I could hear her stop moving for a brief moment before she nodded. You are right. I'm not letting him live rent-free in my head. Good. But what do I do now? She muttered after a long pause. For years all I knew was the fight to survive and the narrow hope I'd get a chance for revenge. You don't have to do anything you don't want to, I said immediately. Simply enjoy every days while I take care of everything. She smiled widely at that, but shook her head. That's sweet of you, Mikey, but I can't just rot in place just because I went through something bad. I know. I sighed. I just don't want you to push yourself. And if I wanted to get back into the business of my own will, she asked pointedly. The business is naturally being mercenary work, then I'd call you a gonk and beg you to reconsider. She laughed, and irritatingly neither confirmed nor refuted the idea. At least I could take solace in the fact that she both looked and sounded like a weight had been lifted off her, even if I would still make sure to ask Misty about her opinion when she paid us a visit next time. We should go back, Mom said after a while. We are starting to attract gawkers. I'm surprised they kept their curiosity under control for this long, I huffed. You underestimate your reputation. She shook her head lightly. Probably. I agreed for the sake of it. You go on ahead, I'll be there in a bit. She told me not to stay out too long and made her way home, and I didn't have to sit and wait long before the expected happened. I had already told Rogue to recall the intervention squad I told her to prepare in case the whole thing was a trap, and paid out the appropriate standby fee the 5 of them had agreed to in advance. The price was considerably greater if they had to do actual work, but getting paid to stand around was something only gonks refused, which only left one other contact in need of talking to. And if my spyware was working as intended, it should be coming right about now. I immediately answered the call and the scowling face of V appeared on the other end. Magos, what the fuck was that? V, I pushed a smile into my voice. Lovely hearing from you. How was your day? Her face turned blank. We are really doing this, really? My face lit up as if to say, really, but my mouth spoke something else. I'm not sure what you are talking about. Werner, you fuck, she snapped. Why did you… V, my voice turned cold the instant I encrypted the call fully. Were you really under the impression that the man was long for this world after you gave me that data? She pinched the bridge of her nose. That is not the point, Em. Then enlighten me, please, I said flatly. I was expecting you to simply disappear the gonk. She said, but you made a spectacle of it. Even the torture would have been fine, but you went and cooked him alive, in front of another corporation. Trauma team doesn't politic like the rest of them, I pointed out. It doesn't matter. She shook her head. Arasaka is taking it as a challenge. The whole branch is up in arms. Was she warning me? My minute frown turned upside down, but I kept my voice flat. That is unfortunate. Unfortunate? She blanked. That is all you have to say. What else do you want me to say, V? I waved my arm, feeling a tiny flash of irritation. No matter how much they dig, they won't find a trace of what happened. You can't be 100% sure of that. Her lips thinned. There is talk of sending specialists from overseas just to find the culprit. I assure you that they will find nothing. I said, I've learned from my past mistakes. She closed her eyes briefly before nodding. I hope you are right. You've really poked the hornet's nest this time, and Jenkins has been running the department ragged. Oh, don't pretend you won't profit from it in some way. I scoffed loudly. A death of a higher-up you knew would happen goes down exactly when you just happen to be too busy with dealing with the Tiger Claw situation to be a suspect or even get involved with the investigation. I gave her a pointed look through the call. In fact, I'm willing to bet you already give a few hints to your contacts in the Corps about potential promotion openings. Her face remained blank throughout my tirade, but I could see the increasing calculation in her eyes before it was replaced by amusement. What was it you said again? Complaining is my God-given right, and I will use it as much as I like. Huh. I snorted. Fair enough. Well, she said after a moment, I should get back to being busy with the Tiger Claw problem now. Be seeing you, Em. Have fun, V, I said, and thanks for the heads up. I saw her pause briefly at that before the call ended. Sometimes, V, I muttered as I got up from the fence, you seem even more confused than I am. Way to sound like an edgy asshole, Mike. Crunch. The popcorn kibble mix disappeared into my mouth as Lei sprawled on my bed, looking up at my TV. Get up, Kenta. The most nondescript Japanese animated character in existence pointed his katana at his bleeding enemy. A real warrior dies on his feet. Crunch. Just as Kenta went to respond, I was distracted by my doors being shoved open and a blur of green bursting inside, only to pause at the sight she found. Seriously? Rebecca deadpanned as she found me watching the newest episode of the Bushido anime. It is like watching a car crash. I shrugged, still shoving kibble down my throat. Incredibly disturbing, but for some reason, you just can't look away no matter how hard you try. She snorted, That's fucking dark. But forget about that. I'm finally free. She exclaimed and rushed at me, jumping face first onto the bed. As she was halfway through breaking her neck, my mechadendrite whipped out and caught her, slowly bringing her down, much to her usual amusement. And what is this dread thing you have finally managed to liberate yourself from, Rebecca? I drawled as I still watched the incredibly cliched scene. You spoiled me. The finger pointed at my face finally drew my attention, and probably what remained of my sanity, away from the screen. You know, I smirked. People usually don't complain about that, but do go on. Pilar is fucking impossible. She clutched at her hair, which had been returned to its usual green, even if in a slightly deeper hue. Fucker literally just threw the trash can from his room into the kitchen and shut the door, twice. Did you try shooting him? Yeah. She sighed in defeat, but he just spends all his money on BDS, so I have to pay for the repairs. Damn, I laughed. You do know you can always just stay here, right? She smiled and looked away. Before turning back to me and pointing at my face, stop making sense. No, I deadpanned. She crossed her arms and pouted, I'll think about it. You do that. I smirked and patted her head patronizingly. She didn't react save for blowing the hair that fell in front of her eyes away with an annoyed puff. We whiled away a few minutes like that, in comfortable silence. So, she spoke up as the episode ended. Are you finally going to tell me about this super secret thingy you and Lana were all hush-hush about? Hmm. I pretend hummed, I don't think so. She poked my side, spill. It's not a pretty story, I muttered. All the more reason to whine about it, she declared confidently, looking up at me with expectant eyes, and so I told her about it, the whole thing. Part of me expecting scorn for Nicholas's death and the torture that followed. More the fool I. Instead of any of that stupid angst, I found myself on the receiving end of a comforting hug. You gave the sucker cocksucker exactly what he deserved. She smiled up at me. He won't be able to do the shit he did to you to anyone else now. And what about his kid? I asked, looking at anywhere except her. He did nothing. Shit happens, she shrugged. Shit happens, I repeated after a moment, tasting the words just like that. It's only as complicated as you want it to be. She poked my chin. You did your best. Stop overthinking it. Did I? I wondered, and promptly received more pokes. All right, I raised my hands. I'll stop overthinking it. And who knows, maybe there was a slim chance Trauma cared enough about their monthly ratings to revive him. Ha! Unaware of my internal monologue, Rebecca just nodded smugly. But that is enough about my family drama. I decided to change topics. You and your team start taking jobs yet? She immediately perked up. Yep, Maine got into contact with some Militech wannabe. And then she proceeded to regale me of a completely mundane smash-and-grab job with all the enthusiasm of a caffeinated hamster. We yapped away until well beyond midnight, inevitably starting another movie night only to both fall asleep before we got 10 minutes in. It was nice. It was a day later that I found myself back in my workshop, looking at a string of data, slowly compiling into what was quickly approaching what felt like the 100th iteration of my future Cyberdex OS. Every previous iteration was functional, but there was no point in changing my current hardware for anything less than perfection. But the process had become pure tedium at this point, so I let my thoughts drift. Just as V had said it would, Arasaka got properly rattled by what Mum and I did, and there were both rumors and news reports speculating on what exactly was happening. Multiple raids happened all across the city, and even a skirmish broke out between Arasaka goons and Tiger Claws, when one of their cyber ninjas got a bit too sure of his position. V was probably having a hell of a time dealing with that particular fuck-up. Point is, no one was coming anywhere close to the truth, which was just the way I liked it. Just as I began absently tinkering with a bullet, my little thought exercise was interrupted by a call. Ms. Jones, I greeted as I picked up. I trust everything went as expected. Magos. The eye patch having fixer nodded. All sites were cleared out and their contents delivered as agreed. She paused briefly, and I noticed the slightest glimmer of amusement in her eye. I was also told by Susie Q that while she appreciates the gesture of trust, she won't be accepting any more help from unknowns. Because of course I didn't inform the Moxes about who sent the rescued Joy Toys their way. Hopefully their story would be enough to satisfy the twins. Not that the two were capable enough to actually demand any kind of satisfaction, but I still wanted to give them some kind of closure, even if I couldn't exactly drag Shobo's burnt corpse to them. I'll be sure to take her opinion into account if there is a next time. I lied as naturally as I breathed and finished listing through the data Regina had sent me. Always a pleasure doing biz with you, Ms. Jones. Wait, she said as I went to end the call. Yes? I need a personal favor done. A personal favor? If you are looking for my services with cyberware, you need only appear at my door. That's not exactly what I meant. She was speaking rather cautiously. Ms. Jones. I said, forgive me for being blunt, but either tell me what you want or don't. No matter what, whatever you say will not leave this call without your say-so. She inhaled slightly and nodded. Right. I'm looking into cyberpsychosis. Have been for years, for reasons that will stay personal. As you might expect, my success has been limited. So that is why you wanted the psycho captured live back then. I noted. Yes. She nodded with only slight hesitation. I've managed to get my hands on a few so far, but they never last long enough for actual results. Poor fuckers probably burn out in days. And what sort of results are you looking for exactly? I prompted, a way to control the state or a cure. Her sole eye blinked. A cure, of course. Right. I nodded. Of course. She made no comment on my skepticism and instead bulldozed on. The reputation of your work with cyberware is already making the rounds, so I am looking to make a long-term agreement. This should be interesting. Go ahead. I want you to be the one to research a cure. She said, I will bankroll the whole thing and provide the subjects whenever possible, but I want your genuine dedication to finding a cure, or at least a treatment. So it's sentimental reasoning then. Probably. I will remind you that cyber part of cyberpsychosis is more often than not only half of the equation. I pointed out. But I am amenable to an agreement, so long as you don't expect me to work on it like a corpo rat, and you don't expect miracles as late as tomorrow. Of course, she nodded. Any kind of progress would satisfy me at this point. Let's not go that far, I said, not before I give it a proper try first. And speaking of that, she said I already have a lead for a potential subject. Didn't you say you would provide the subjects? I asked a bit wryly. Are you complaining about getting paid twice, Margos? She retorted. I failed to hold back the amused huff. Give me the deets, Ms. Jones.